Chapter 728. He pulled the electronic gloves beeping with blue light off his hands and turned around to face Gustav. "Do you remember what you did?" he asked again while walking forward. He sat on a chair in front of the stretcher-like bed Gustav was seated on. He didn't even need to wait for Gustav's answer. The look on his face said it all, but Sir Zil could still see confusion mixed in amongst the myriad of expressions on Gustav's face. He clapped his hand twice, causing a holographic screen to appear in midair, right in front of Gustav. From above, the image of a part of the city was displayed on the holographic screen. This displayed a massive crater that spanned for over 100 miles. Different authorities could be seen on the scene inspecting the phenomenon. The image changed every 5 seconds, displaying different places within the city that were destroyed by Gustav. "Yes, you're responsible for all that," Sir Zil stated after the last image was shown. "You went on a rampage after Danzo was killed, I presume. Sorry for your loss. His corpse was found in the first place that destroyed," Sir Zil added with a sigh. Gustav's face turned darker and hardened even more as he heard that. "How did you find me?" he asked. "I found you passed out a few miles away from the last location. Almost thought you were dead," Sir Zil answered. "There was no heartbeat on you till yesterday. But I knew you were alive because you would occasionally breathe in and out every 1 hour," Sir Zil explained with a look of astonishment. He was still intrigued about how Gustav was alive for 3 days without a single heartbeat. He would only take in oxygen and send out carbon dioxide after an hour. "Also, your skin was really dark like you were burnt. But that changed after a single day, and your original skin tone returned." Sir Zil didn't miss any detail as he voiced out. He still wanted to know how Gustav was able to pull off everything he did. Especially since he knew Gustav wasn't that powerful originally. Gustav also wanted the answer to this same question since the only thing he knew was the hidden rage ability was activated. He didn't expect it to be as powerful as that. "I see," Gustav answered as he slid off the bed and stood to his feet. "Thanks for the hospitality, Scientist Zil. I will be taking my leave now," Gustav voiced out as he staggered across the place due to weak knees. "I haven't felt this weak in a long time," Gustav thought as he nearly fell to the side. Sir Zil grabbed hold of him from the side and supported weight. "I don't think leaving here would be a wise choice right now," Sir Zil stated as he tried to help Gustav back to the bed. "I can't keep imposing on you. I'll be fine by myself," Gustav responded with a tone of disagreement. "You need to recuperate, and believe me, you shouldn't be seen out in the open right now," Sir Zil said as he helped Gustav turn back around and led him to the bed area. The way Sir Zil worded that made Gustav feel suspicious, so he decided to ask. "What do you mean by, I shouldn't be seen out in the open right now?" Gustav asked as he sat down back on the bed. "Haphius bring up today's news," Sir Zil voiced out in response. Troin, the holographic projection, appeared in midair once again. Unlike the last one, which displayed images, this one displayed today's breaking news on one of the media outlets. Breaking news! The main suspect said to be involved in the destruction of WG District and other locations in the city has been revealed to be MBO officer/trainee Gustav Crimson. Breaking news! Survivors of the destruction incident have claimed there was an involvement of an MBO officer, Gustav Crimson. Breaking news! Witnesses report from survivors have identified the culprit to be Gustav Crimson, an MBO officer/cadet. He was also said to have saved the lives of some survivors while clashing with unknown assailants. Gustav watched as different media outlets showcased different versions of breaking news, all with a similar connection. Gustav Crimson is now wanted worldwide. According to some of them, the survivors said outrightly that he caused the destruction after transforming into a monster, which was identified to be the form Gustav took when decimation was activated. Some of the survivors he saved from the hotel building said it wasn't to blame since he was battling with 3 other powerful entities that wanted to murder everyone. So far, they had figured out that the whole chaotic incident was linked to him, and now they wanted to get him to know the full story. Gustav was now wanted all across the world for being the main suspect in the mass murder and destruction of properties worth hundreds of millions. In other words, he was now a fugitive. At this moment, the world was in awe since a lot of people still recognized Gustav to be the golden star of the MBO candidates just a year ago. Different kinds of questions ran through everyone's minds as they saw the news circulating across the globe. Shouldn't he be in training? It has only been a year. How did he become powerful enough to cause citywide destruction? Many questions were related to this, which was why people felt a lot of things didn't add up with the news. Every single authoritative force in the world was out to get Gustav at the moment, while he was in Serzel's personal lab. So now I'm wanted, Gustav mumbled with a slightly tired tone. Well, over 2,700 people died, so this is to be expected, Serzel responded candidly. Gustav didn't really know what to say to this. Thinking about the whole scenario now, Gustav realized that when the decimation skill activated, all he could think about was rage and destruction. Chapter 729. Thinking about the whole scenario now, Gustav realized that rage and destruction were all he could think about when the decimation skill activated. The power granted to him with that skill was only capable of destruction. He recalled how powerful he felt during that period, like he could destroy the entire city if he kept going off. However, now that he was awake, he could feel that something wasn't quite right with the way he felt now due to his body feeling extremely weak. He felt like he wouldn't be able to channel bloodline energy at the moment. Gustav held his hand up slightly and stared at it. I lost control. Boss Danzo. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, but I have destroyed the bastards responsible for your death, and I don't regret what happened, Gustav said internally. I know you wouldn't have wanted me to do anything, especially when none of these actions would bring you back, but I would never be able to live with myself if I had let them get away with this. Gustav looked down as he thought. Revenge truly doesn't take the pain away. Gustav didn't know when droplets of tears began to fall from his eyes. Even with all that power, in the end, I'm still a miserable piece of shit who was unable to change the outcome of the situation. You were the very first person to ever treat me like I was not an empty space in the world. A leech. A thorn. An invisible entity. A useless existence. Your personality made me have a little faith in humanity. Made me think there might still be hope for the species living on the face of this planet. If there were more people like you, the world would definitely be a better place. But good people get to suffer the worst fates while cruel and merciless people like myself survive and rule the world. It's not fair. Deep in thoughts, Gustav lamented. He had never known the pain of losing a loved one, and he never thought he would because right from his childhood days, he couldn't consider anyone a loved one. He didn't think it would hurt this bad for someone who had been portrayed to have a steel heart. Gustav! Serzel voiced out and placed his hand on Gustav's left shoulder. I cannot fathom how much Danzo must have meant to you, but you. Sorry for your loss once again, but you have to stay here till we figure out how to handle the situation on the surface, Serzel said with a compassionate tone. All right, thank you, Gustav responded while cleaning the tears off his face. I will leave you alone for now and come back sometime later. If you need anything, just tell Zook. It will meet your demands, Serzel said while pointing at the 4-feet-tall humanoid assistant bot moving about in the lab. Gustav nodded in response while Serzel proceeded to head out of the lab. 4 days is enough to get regenerated fully. Am I still weak because of the skill? A backlash, maybe? Gustav thought as he tried channeling his bloodline. His body made some weird bubbling sounds for a few seconds before going silent. I can barely channel any strength from my bloodlines, Gustav noticed. His original bloodline especially was affected, and Gustav couldn't shape-shift in this state. This made leaving the lab even more impossible since he couldn't change his looks. He would instantly be discovered. System interface, Gustav called out. Unable to generate system interface. What? Gustav exclaimed with a dumbfounded tone. System interface, he called out again. Unable to generate system interface, The same notification as before popped up in his line of sight. What's going on? He wondered. Timer, 4 of 7 days. Another notification popped up in Gustav's line of sight. Timer? His mind quickly brought up a myriad of theories as he saw this notification that didn't give full details. I've been asleep for 4 days now. It says 4 out of 7, which could mean the system became inoperable since I blacked out. 3 more days are left till it becomes operational again. This was the most meaningful theory he could come up with at this time. He remembered that this was like the time the system had an upgrade over a year ago. He had to wait for 3 to 4 days before he could use the system. However, in this case, he knew it wasn't a system upgrade since the system was whole again. It would need an immense amount of power to upgrade beyond its current state. Gustav could already tell that this had to do with the hidden rage skill, but he still wondered how and why the system was affected. Looks like I have to wait now, Gustav sighed as he thought. He hated this feeling of vulnerability, but there was no choice right now. As he lay on the bed, he suddenly recalled something and jerked up. Carissa's and the other kid. He recalled creating a barrier of Iroh silk around them, but Boss Danzo was able to appear in front of him and block the hit, which meant the wall was encirclement was broken through. If they were among the deceased, it would also be breaking news since the other kid has a powerful and popular background. Gustav analyzed. That means they're alive somewhere. Probably hiding away for now. The authorities must be searching for them as well. Gustav felt the survivors must have mentioned the presence of 2 other kids in the vicinity. Since both of them were witnesses, the authorities would definitely want their input on what happened. These 2 were the only ones besides Gustav who knew how the incident began. They'll have to ask Sir Zilt to find them for me, Gustav thought. In an unknown region, several high-standing MBO officials sat in a boardroom. 12 of them sat around a massive table in the middle, which displayed a holographic image of Gustav dressed in his cadet outfit. Chapter 730. A few of the high-standing MBO officials were holographic projections since they couldn't attend the meeting in person. But it was quite obvious that this was an important meeting since Gustav was involved. Revoke his MBO title. One of them voiced out as it would seem the meeting had already begun. There's no definite proof that he's the culprit. Another one voiced out. The witnesses say he transformed into the dark and reddish creature from the reports that was seen floating above the places that were destroyed. That power level is bordering on peak delta and beginning beta. According to the stats, he's supposed to be a Falcon ranked. It simply doesn't make sense that a first-year cadet would be able to perform a feat that even veteran officers would be unable to. He still needs to be brought in for questioning. The world government demands answers. He has been declared missing even though he's supposed to be in the city. That's proof enough that he is deeply involved in this incident. An innocent person wouldn't hide. The officials argued back and forth as a side stood on the theory that Gustav would not be able to perform such a feat since he was still a cadet, while the other side was sure he was deeply involved if not responsible, which was tarnishing the image of the MBO. It became a debate on whether or not to revoke his MBO title and how to find him. The MBO still had its methods, but to actualize some methods, harsh decisions would have to be made. A middle-aged-looking man with a double-tipped green arrow tattoo on his chin area along with a long green braided hair in the middle of his head was at the front of the table. This happened to be the most important position around the table. However, he still hadn't said a word yet and kept listening to the others argue. I suggest we implement the life sign tracking apparatus and find him instantly. You know what the side effects are. Is anyone willing to negate it for him, or are we just going to let him suffer it when we are not sure if he is truly responsible for the incident? Tough situations require tough measures. The whole place quietened the instant the middle-aged man with the one strand of green braid made a loud hum. Everyone turned to face him since they could tell he was about to say something. Has his mentor been informed yet? The man questioned. Young Miss Amy is currently on a mission, so I don't think she has been informed. One of them answered. It has only been 4 days since the incident. No drastic steps shall be taken yet, the man voiced out. Yes, great Commander Murbies. Every official in the vicinity answered in unison. Deploy a squad of special agents to Burning Sands City with scout-related bloodline abilities to find him. 1 more week of searching and sending out warnings for him to turn himself in should be enough leniency. After that, drastic actions can be taken if he still chooses to remain hidden, Grand Commander Murby stated with a strong tone. Also, inform his mentor, he added while standing to his feet and turning around to leave. I'll like to see how the young miss will react to this, he said internally while leaving the room. Vehicle City. In a city surrounded by a wall of blue clouds, the streets were peaceful and bustling with activity just as a city would. Vehicle City was known for its interspace travel stations. If one wanted to travel out of the Earth, and wasn't rich enough to afford to go through MBO means, Vehicle City was the place to visit. Lots of people who wished to migrate out of the planet, or just wanted to visit other planets on expeditions, made use of Vehicle City a lot. Although the organizations that owned space stations in Vehicle City were licensed, making it legal, some people still wouldn't travel with them even though it was cheaper. One of the reasons was there were rumors of the organizations using spacecraft that hadn't been well serviced, or having some kind of engine issues. This made some people skeptical about coming here to travel out of the planet, since they didn't want to get stuck in space due to spacecraft engine failure. Nevertheless, people who had no choice would still come here. Presently, Miss Amy was in a part of this city. Within a space station takeoff ground, Miss Amy could be seen holding on to the neck of an 8 feet tall and buff man as she floated in midair, right beneath the engine area of a massive spacecraft. This spacecraft looked similar to 2 discs placed side by side, silver in color but looking a bit worn out. It was the size of a 10-story building. Red Shadow, on the count of 3, start the engine, she voiced out with a cold tone. Roger that. Red Shadow's voice resounded in her ear even though he wasn't there. The man whose neck was being held onto tightly shook in fright as he tried freeing himself from Miss Amy's grasp, all to no avail. Since you want to do this the hard way, then why not? Just know that the blast and temperature from the engine of a spacecraft when it is about to start is enough to disintegrate you in a matter of seconds, but I will still remain unaffected. Well, of course, you know this since you own this establishment anyways, Miss Amy stated with an unbothered tone. Please, I've told you everything I know, the man shouted out with a fearful look. Not enough. Tell me more, Miss Amy stated. I don't know anything else, he answered with a pleading tone. 1. Miss Amy began counting down. Please, I swear that's as much information as I know. He really didn't tell me much, too. Miss Amy kept counting down. No, please no, I have a family, the man kept shouting out. I don't care. Miss Amy responded with a death glare before adding. 3. Chapter 731. Shrum. A burst of smoke first blasted forth from beneath the engine. Kairar! Ill speak, spar! The man's screams were drowned in the loud volume of the starting spacecraft engine. Bluish-colored flames blasted forth heavily without restriction, spreading across the surroundings. Fortunately, this was a takeoff point, so it was massive and void of living creatures. Even though the empty space of the takeoff point covered a radius of more than 15,000 feet, the bluish-colored flames still covered the entire vicinity. It looked like Miss Amy, and the man had already been consumed by the flames with the look of things. However, when the force of the engine slowly died down, and the fire retracted, 2 people could still be seen floating right underneath the engine area of the spacecraft. Purplish ore-like energy covered them both, and it would seem not a single scratch had been inflicted on both of them even with the temperature and blasting forth of the engine. The man was breathing in and out heavily at this point as he touched himself with a shocked look on his face seeing as he was still alive. His face flushed as he could feel wetness in his groin area. Now that you have something to tell me, spill or we go through what just happened earlier again, Miss Amy voiced out. Yes, you see, ma'am, not that I didn't want to tell you, but… the man voiced out shakily, trying to explain himself. Go straight to the point, Miss Amy cut him short before he could complete his sentence. Yes, ma'am, He began to start explaining something to Miss Amy. A few minutes later, Miss Amy was leaving the vicinity with Red Shadow while the spacecraft was parked by the side. The poor man who had almost lost his life was kneeling behind with an almost lifeless look while staring at Miss Amy and Red Shadow disappearing into the distance. It was obvious Miss Amy had protected both of them from the outburst of flames from the spacecraft engine. Her tactic was very solid, using such a means to scare the victim into spilling. If on the verge of death, they still remained adamant that they had spilled everything, that would mean the person was telling the truth, because no one would want to carry a truth that belonged to something else to their grave. Miss Amy, of course, already covered him with her energy before the outburst from the engine, so if he had been telling the truth about revealing everything earlier, he wouldn't die. Outside the premises of the location, which read, Dinkler Space Travel Agency, Miss Amy and Red Shadow paused their movements. She was currently receiving a video call as a holographic projection appeared right in front of her. Yes, I know about it already, she responded to the MBO officer on the other side, who had a respectful gaze as he spoke to her. Then young miss, why? Before the person on the other side could complete their statement, she interrupted. You lots dare not touch him until I'm done here. Anyone that harms him will answer to me, she stated with a powerful and threatening tone. The person on the other side instantly kept quiet, not wanting to get on her nerves. If he truly committed such an act, then there must be an underlying reason. I will find him myself and hand him over if I judge the situation to be his fault, Miss Amy stated before ending the call. Red Shadow, who has been beside her all this time without speaking, finally spoke. After you find him, will you truly hand him over to them? He asked. No, she responded without any hesitation. If they truly wish to get him from me, then they are welcome to try, Miss Amy stated before moving towards the black hovercar up ahead. What if he's already dead? The witnesses say he was battling 3 powerful opponents, Red Shadow voiced out as he followed after her. Gustav won't die so easily. He's my student, Miss Amy said with a confident tone, knowing Gustav had multiple means of escape at his disposal. She had no idea that he was truly almost killed, since he was in a situation where he couldn't leave the people he was protecting behind. After getting into the hovercar, it zoomed off. Red Shadow, the moment we get rid of the nuclear toxin bomb, I'll leave the rest to you. I have to go and find him, Miss Amy voiced out as they traveled across the city. Sure, you can count on me, Red Shadow responded affirmatively. 3 days later, during the last 3 days, Gustav spent his time recuperating, gathering information about happenings within the city, and making plans. The authorities' forces had increased in numbers across the city, looking for him everywhere, but were still unable to find him. There were multiple powerful MBO officers with scanning bloodline abilities that had tried to use different means to locate him, but all failed. Sir Zill's personal lab was crafted with well-cloaking tiles and top-notch technology that rendered most of these abilities useless, even though some of them were very powerful. Gustav just had to stay hidden within the lab in the meantime. The MBO was the most powerful force on the Earth and one of the most powerful across galaxies, so it was no surprise that they would have a lot of forces. But still, top-notch criminals like Jabal would still be able to escape regardless, because they were able to couple technologies like this with their intelligence. However, it had been a long time since the MBO mobilized this amount of force, and this was due to the number of lives lost. If Jabal was in this same situation, it would be extremely difficult for him to escape, since they had never come after him like this before. The city had been locked down, so no one could leave or come in except officials. Chapter 732. Even making use of shape-shifting might be seen through with the number of forces that were in place. Still, Gustav would not risk anything when he couldn't even channel his bloodlines properly yet. Fortunately, during the last 3 days he had healed up quite well. He was able to channel his bloodline abilities to a certain extent, but he felt it would still take a few days more before he could get back to his initial state. Sir Zill was able to find Carissa's and Marshall after some time. He sent Marshall back to his family and brought Carices to the lab. Carices was so joyful when she saw that Gustav was okay. She embraced and cried in his arms when they reunited. Gustav was glad that she was okay, but Carices was sure Gustav wasn't okay, remembering what happened to Boss Danzo. Even though she was 15 years of age, she could understand how much of a loss it would have been, since Boss Danzo was like a father to Gustav. She also admired him a lot due to his personality, and since he saved her on multiple occasions. Gustav had admitted that he could only find Carices the other day due to Boss Danzo, since he only had Boss Danzo's life sign at the time. I want to get his corpse and give him a proper burial, but I'll need to get his granddaughter to be in attendance too, so maybe not right now. Gustav voiced out one of his thoughts after Carices asked him what next. Oh, I remember he did say he had a granddaughter, Carices said with a thoughtful gaze. She was still surprised that Boss Danzo, who looked he was not a day over 45, had a granddaughter who was age mates with Gustav. Thinking about it now, she stared at the renowned scientist Sir Zil and realized that it was a similar situation with him. Sir Zil looked like he was no older than 30 years, yet he had multiple grandkids. He could honestly pretend to be a young dude and go out to get chicks due to his handsome looks. In just a few days I would have recuperated completely. Then I will put my plans into motion, Gustav stated. What are your plans? It would be almost impossible to escape from the city, and everywhere you go, you would be wanted, Sir Zil stated. Don't worry, I'm not escaping yet. I still need to get the third and fourth quarter of your research from the Bureau of Cities Research Center. Visiting there as a fugitive would make things harder. It would be easier if I still had my original identity as an MBO officer, Gustav stated. Sir Zil and Carices squinted their eyes as they heard that. It looked like Gustav was up to something crazy, and from what he had said so far, it seemed like he wanted a clear name. This would be difficult to achieve, but knowing Gustav, they felt he could do the impossible based on his feats so far. Carices, you will be coming with me when I leave this city, but till I'm done dealing with my issues, stay with scientists Zil and Damien, Gustav instructed. Carices nodded in response and later left with Sir Zil. Gustav sat by himself in the lab again, dressed in green pajamas that he had been wearing since he woke up 3 days back. System interface, he called out. Host attributes, abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop, alien lifeforms, it's back. Gustav thought before voicing out. Host attributes. Host attributes, name, Gustav Crimson level, 59 class, under evaluation, EXP 7, 637, 800/14, 360, 000 HP, 52, 000/52, 000 energy, 27, 500/27, 500, attributes, strength, 209 perception, 206 mental fortitude, 207 agility, 210 speed, 208 bravery, 208 intelligence, 209 charm, 96 defense, 207 vitality, 208 endurance, 209 attributes points, 56. Gustav stared at his current attributes with a look of awe. I leveled up 10 times? Gustav was a bit shocked. But thinking about how many people died at his hands, he felt this was plausible. Another confusion that he had was seeing what was written in front of his class. Why is it under evaluation? He wondered. He recalled that during his battle with the 3 opponents who caused Boss Danzo's death, he never tried to use cosmic superiority because he knew his hierarchy wouldn't affect them. All 3 of them were kilo-ranked mixed bloods. During his training with Miss Amy, he had tried using it on her before when she reduced her strength to the lowest of kilo rank level, yet she was unaffected. At first, Gustav felt her being her it wouldn't work no matter how much she reduced her strength, so they tried using another kilo-ranked mixed blood in the second base, and the results were still the same. His hierarchy was not powerful enough to affect beyond echo-ranked mixed bloods at the time. The system had later explained to him that he would have to train his hierarchy to get more powerful or increase his cosmic superiority stage before he could affect anyone beyond the echo rank level. Knowing this, he didn't try to use it during the fight, But now he recalled when decimation was activated, he made use of Yarki, and it covered the entire city. His mind was like an entity looming over the city at that time, and he could sense everyone falling to their knees just like he wanted, including the kilo-ranked mixed bloods. Did it have that much effect because of decimation? Gustav felt decimation gave his Yarki a boost. Now that he was checking his stats and seeing the words under evaluation, he felt a bit suspicious, hoping this wouldn't negatively affect his cosmic superiority. You sure went off without caring about the consequences, eh? The voice of the system suddenly resounded in his mind. TCH, so you're back. Why were you silent for so long? Gustav asked. Whose fault is it that I had to hide away and shut down the system for a week? It responded in his head. Whose fault is it? Gustav asked while feigning a clueless look. Chapter 733. Whose fault is it that I had to hide away and shut down the system for a week? It responded in his head. Whose fault is it? Gustav asked while feigning a clueless look. Don't play dumb with me. For a computerized being with a sentience, the system almost sounded annoyed when it was supposed to be emotionless. Even the automatically induced calming toxin didn't work, the system said once again. I have toxin immunity, Gustav reminded the system, which I can easily override since I live inside of you. But your emotions were just too strong, the system stated. It is understandable since you lost someone important to you. Human emotions. A strong vulnerability, but also a powerful tool, the system analyzed with a fascinated tone. Gustav. Sorry for your loss. I could really feel every speck of emotion, and even now, I can feel the anguish within you. You blame yourself for what happened, the system said with a sympathetic tone. How could I not? I pushed myself day in day out to get stronger, and even with everything, I was unable to protect the one person who cared for me like a father even though we're not biologically related. Gustav voiced out with a darkened face. There was nothing you could do about it. The enemies were out of your league. If he had not intervened, you would have died, the system voiced in response. Although you wouldn't, because I would have teleported you away in the last minute, that would mean everyone else would have died. Gustav couldn't hear this because this was the system's inner thoughts. You could say Boss Danzo saved the day since his death triggered the activation of decimation, which resulted in you defeating the enemies, preventing the death of the survivors and Carisas whom Boss Danzo saved. The system stated once again. You Earthlings believe in heaven, so he's probably up there smiling at you in satisfaction. It added. Even though I killed close to 3,000 people? Gustav asked bluntly. Asterisk cough cough asterisk of course. The system chuckled nervously while responding. If Gustav could see the face she was making within him right now, he would probably cough out blood. Look on the bright side. You destroyed the 3 kingpins of the city, resulting in the end of their illegal activities. This has made other big shots in the city go into hiding, feeling they might be next, so legal activities might as well be inexistent in this city for a long time. The system analyzed. I don't know about that. Evil can never be truly rooted out, Gustav voiced out in response. But at least you've prevented a lot of future deaths. The illegal underground battles will no longer be able to hold, which means people in similar situations like Boss Danzo won't be exploited anymore, and there won't be unnecessary deaths. There's still a lot of good that came out of this, the system tried assuring Gustav. Gustav's heart remained on the fence with this one. He knew the system was trying to make him feel better, but he wasn't so much of a hypocrite that he would pretend like his actions were noble. He wasn't truly concerned about all those deaths because he could sense that he gave a warning before destroying those structures. He was feeling pathetic because he couldn't prevent Boss Danzo's death. Why was the system on lockdown for a week? Gustav decided to ask. The decimation ability is not one that gets activated without consequences. It gives you the strength to climb several levels higher in power than normal, but then it saps your life force while activated, the system explained. It saps life force? In what way? Does that mean the number of my years decrease or my potential? Gustav questioned. Well, since the hidden ability is no longer so hidden, I might as well reveal this. Every second it remains active withdraws a month's worth of life force from you. The system revealed. A month? That's too much. Gustav didn't realize the side effects of the hidden rage skill would be this high. The skill was activated for about 20 minutes before you passed out, so your life force has decreased by 100 years. The system made the calculation and voiced out. Gustav instantly realized the calculations were accurate the moment it was voiced out. Based on the increase in bloodline rank, a mixed blood could live for as long as 300 to thousands of years. My current level, Falcon rank, mixed bloods at this stage tend to live for as long as 600 to 700 years, which means I should have 500 or 600 years worth of life force left. Gustav analyzed. You probably don't know, but the vitality from having me within you actually increases your life force. The system revealed. Huh? Really? Gustav questioned. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it should be wasted. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. It is close to impossible to activate decimation without immense rage, which isn't something that comes about so easily, so I'm sure we won't be seeing this ability in a long time, if not forever. The system stated, which caused Gustav's face to lit up with curiosity. Close to impossible to activate without immense rage? Which means it's possible to activate it without rage, but the chances as slim. Gustav couldn't let go of the loophole in the system words and tried to clarify. Moving on. The reason I deactivated for a week is that your body was extremely weak after decimation was deactivated due to a large amount of life force that was sapped from you. Your body would explode if I normally operated at the time, since I'm whole now compared to the first time I found you. The system explained. Looks like it doesn't want to talk about that, eh? Always withholding information from me, tch. Gustav said in his inner thoughts, away from the system's perception. Oh, I see. I guess that was a necessary step. Gustav noted. One more thing. My class. Chapter 734. One more thing. My class, it says under evaluation? Is this part of the negative side effects of decimation? Will my cosmic superiority be revoked? Gustav asked with a slightly disturbed look. Oh, that. It's under evaluation because it had undergone a change when you made use of it while decimation was activated. The system began explaining. I thought as much. Gustav already figured this part out. Decimation gives you the power of destruction, which means all your other skills and abilities, both bloodlines related and system based, are locked during that period. You can only cause destruction, but for unknown reasons, you were able to activate your Yarki, which is the reason for the current state of your class. Your Yarki has been affected. The system explained lengthily. I was barely in control of my actions, so I had no idea what prompted me to use it. I could only think of causing carnage and destruction at that time, so the thought of using any other abilities besides the ones I could conjure while decimation was activated never came to me. Now that I think of it, I didn't feel like I had any bloodline. Gustav tried to analyze the state of his mind during his moment of rage. You can check the state of your Yarki, the system suggested. I can't. I already tried, but I can't sense it within me. Gustav responded. Try harder. It's still in there but hidden, the system stated. Since the system had said this, Gustav was no longer as worried as before, but his curiosity was still piqued, so he decided to try sensing his Yarki again. Just like he said earlier, he had truly tried to sense his Yarki, but he couldn't. Maybe it was due to the fact that he was still recovering, so his senses weren't as strong, but now that the system told him to try harder, he decided to do just that. Gustav focused his senses on his internal structure, phasing through the outline of his multiple bloodlines within. His senses scanned through, trying to find Yarki like the last time. About 2 hours later, Gustav finally sensed a small flicker of the Yarki's energy. It was slightly different from how he recalled it to be, and it seemed like another type of energy was making its presence. Gustav followed his senses, scanning deeper and deeper into his internal structure. Then finally, his senses came across a kind of ashy-colored wraps. It looked like mini-sized ash-colored band-aids were wrapped around something. Through a thin gap within one of the wraps, Gustav could see a slightly pink glow. From the energy that emitted, Gustav already knew that was his Yarki. But it would seem his Yarki was sealed by these ashy-colored wraps, and he had no means of freeing it at the moment. He tried making his senses wrap around the restraints and remove them, but it didn't work. The pinkish glow he could see from the gaps looked like they were slowly changing in color. In some areas, he could see a tinge of red, while in some areas, it was transparent pink, and in some, it was deep pink. It's changing. This means I'm not losing my cosmic superiority. Gustav was relieved seeing this, but this led to another curiosity. He wondered what the end result would be. Although he was curious, he didn't bother asking the system because he knew it probably wouldn't reveal any more information to him at the moment. The only thing he could do right now was wait. On the bright side, he could shape-shift now even though he hadn't completely recovered. Even though he could only maintain it for like an hour, it was enough for him to go out into the city and check the current state of things. Gustav told the humanoid bot in the lab to get him some clothes. In a few minutes, Gustav was dressed in some baggy blue shirt and shorts. He had an afro-styled hair with a darker skin and a shorter frame. His looks had completely changed. But he looked like a normal citizen, so he wouldn't attract any attention to himself while walking down the streets. He leaped through the window from Sir Zill's office and landed several feet away from the building. From there, he began walking on foot. Was this look inspired by E? The system asked in his head. Who cares? Gustav responded half-assedly as he moved to the nearest public transport station. If things don't get better, you might have to forget about seeing them ever again, the system stated, hinting at his friends in the MBO camp. Doesn't matter. They probably already heard the news by now. If I don't ever go back to the MBO camp, then our acquaintance ended months back, Gustav responded in his mind with an emotionless look. Yeah, right, keep acting like you don't long to see them again every single day. The system cackled with its thin girl-like voice. I'm a mixed-blood fugitive now, remember? It's gonna be their job to catch me. If things don't turn out well, we'll be on opposing sides, and I'll have to see them as my enemies, Gustav reminded the system. Does that mean you'll kill them if they cross your path? Can you really do it? The system questioned with a scoff. I don't know what's gonna happen if we ever meet again. Gustav pictured the group in his mind and thought. Yes, with his ever-jovial personality, afro-styled hair, and calculative instincts. Ildris with his insane height, beautiful girl looks, charismatic personality, and long white hair. Falco with his timid looks but demonic alter ego. Glade with her mean looks but friendly personality. Matilda with her beautiful princess-like looks and proud countenance. Vera with her innocent looks but crazy personality. Timmy with his calm outlook and short physique. Rio with his loudness and competitive spirit, and finally Angie with her cute looks, admirable protective personality, and caring soul. Chapter 735. Gustav realized he missed them more than he cared to admit, but with the state of things right now, if the disastrous situation wasn't handled, they might end up as enemies. I just gotta do my best, I guess, Gustav thought as his face showed with determination. Minutes later, Gustav arrived at the location where the battle between him and the three mixed bloods, Ring Lord Vanisher hired, took place. During his trip here, he had seen the state of the city from outside the hover bus windows. Burning Sands City had slowly resumed its daily activities even though the city was still recovering from the incident. There were thrice as many authorities patrolling the city than before and moving around with scanning devices. He already knew that was because of him. He got down from the public transport and looked around the place. There were restrictions put in place to surround the entire environment. A massive crater could be seen where the buildings in the vicinity used to be located. This one wasn't even Gustav's fault because the entire place got destroyed due to the power of the mixed blood with the golden beam. This was how powerful Kilo ranks were, and why they were considered a powerhouse wherever they visited on the earth. Only a small percentage of mixed bloods was kilo ranks, so it costs a lot to hire just one of them, but the ring lords were able to hire 3, which showed just how rich they were. They had accumulated a lot of illegal money. Gustav could see people on the scene beside the authorities. Some people came to drop flowers here, as it would seem they were family members with some of the deceased who were obliterated on the spot. Some of the deceased were lucky enough to still have corpses, but some got completely obliterated. Voices of sobbing could be occasionally heard in the background as some family members mused about how the person they lost was an awesome person and all that grieving statements. Gustav was moving around without any look of remorse on his face, even though the environment gave off a sad vibe. They must have swept the scene clean. Gustav was sure he wouldn't be able to find anything here even if he looked. He moved towards one of the authorities and called their attention to ask a question. "Sorry for the disturbance, officer. I would like to know where the corpses of the casualties were taken," Gustav inquired. "Are you the family member of one of the deceased?" the female cop asked. "Yes," Gustav answered. "Sorry for your loss," she said with a look of pity. "I appreciate it," Gustav responded. "You'll have to head over to St. Luther Medical Center and give proof of your relationship to the deceased. Tests have been run to determine the identity of corpses that can't be recognized with physical appearance," she explained while giving Gustav direction on how he was going to get there. "Thank you," Gustav responded before turning around to leave. "Don't worry, the culprit will be caught soon," the female cop voiced out loudly as Gustav walked away. "The MBO is about to implement a plan in the coming week. Gustav Crimson days are numbered," she added. Gustav paused his steps and turned around to bow slightly in appreciation. "I'm sure he will. Thank you all for working hard," Gustav voiced out before turning around once more to leave. The young female cop had a proud look on her face after receiving the thanks and went back to her duties. If she ever found out that she just finished talking to the person she said would soon be caught, she would probably bash her head against the wall repeatedly in shame. As Gustav traveled with public transit once more towards the hospital mentioned earlier, he was in deep thoughts. The MBO is about to implement a plan to catch me? For her to sound so confident, it must be something foolproof. Gustav was curious as to what the MBO was up to. "I have to be really careful then," she said in the coming week. "I have about 5 days to complete my plans, and then I should probably find a way to leave the city before then or go into deeper hiding," Gustav thought. The MBO was really capable when they wanted to be, so he didn't want to take any chances with them. If they caught him beforehand, chances were, all the blame would be put on him. Those within the MBO that secretly hated him due to his relationship with Miss Amy and his fast rise would use this as an opportunity to put him down even more. He had no doubt that the MBO was probably about to revoke his title, that was if they hadn't. A scapegoat was definitely needed for this incident, and Gustav had managed to destroy everyone that had a hand in it. He was the only one left now, which meant everything would fall on his head. The whole debate about whether or not he was the cause of it all would mean nothing the instant he couldn't provide any proof of fighting against enemies. Gustav could call Miss Amy to help him out, but he had decided to man up and face this himself. He felt he couldn't keep relying on Miss Amy for everything, especially when he knew she was on a mission. He preferred being an asset rather than a liability. "Hey, system. Are you sure it's possible to do what you have said?" Gustav asked internally as he made his way to the hospital. "Sure. Just make sure you find his corpse," the system responded. Gustav arrived at St. Luther Medical Center after some time, and instantly walked into the tall building once he got off the public transit. The place was bustling, with lots of people going in and out. Not only was it a massive medical center where a lot of patients were brought in daily, but it was also the closest medical center to the first incident scene, so lots of corpses were brought over. Family members came over to claim some of the bodies of their kin. Chapter 736. Gustav didn't even bother meeting up with one of the medical personnel here because he already knew they would ask for identity. He wasn't biologically related to Boss Danzo, so the next step he took was to scan the entire building using God eyes. His eyes moved from place to place as he looked for the office where records were kept. In a few minutes, he found it and took the disguise of a medical practitioner before moving into the office. He had quickly knocked a doctor out and kept him hidden in one of the lockers in his office. Normal people were still no match for mixed bloods after all, especially when it was someone like Gustav. The doctor was knocked out before he knew what was happening. There were about 4 doctors in the records room at the time when he moved in, and 3 of them were ladies. They greeted Gustav thinking he was the original doctor, and asked what he was looking for. Gustav explained, and one of them moved in to grab the record he was looking for. In a few moments, she handed a square-shaped pinky-sized device to Gustav. He tapped on it, and information about what he was looking for appeared in the holographic format above the device. Classified deceased information: deceased name, Adrian Danzo AG, 79 Cold Room NO, 29 Tag NO, 982 Floor, 13. Why is it classified? Gustav asked with a confused look. Besides the other information, he could see the red label above that said classified. Gustav looked at the other doctor who came in here to check on one, and didn't see the same red label above. Oh, Dr. Markland, did you forget? The authorities asked us to report immediately if anyone came looking for this person's corpse. The lady responded from the other side of the counter. Oh, I see, thank you, Gustav responded. After checking the info for a few seconds more like he hadn't already crammed it, he passed the device back to them and left. Hey, don't you think Dr. Markland was acting a bit strange? One of the ladies questioned with a weird look. Yeah, he would have scolded us at 10 times for things we didn't do before leaving. The one in the middle voiced out. And he even said thank you? He never says thank you, the third one added. It would seem the identity Gustav had taken on was quite the problematic one. Not performing said actions made them see Gustav as extremely suspicious. Gustav would normally not arouse any suspicions with stealing identities if he didn't have to engage in conversations, but in this situation, it was inescapable. This made one of them recall something and walk out of the office. Gustav arrived at the 13th floor of the building, which was a floor full of storage rooms for corpses. He recalled the room number he was looking for as he walked along the massive corridors. This area was pretty scanty since only a few people in medical outfits could be seen around here. Gustav recalled what the lady said about Boss Danzo's information being restricted and the instruction of the authorities. Good plan to catch anyone who comes for Boss Danzo's corpse and question them. Gustav was glad he didn't try to pretend like he was a family member using the other disguise. That would lead them to call the cops on him, which could prove disastrous since he couldn't tell if they would have devices that might unmask his fake identity. I have about 40 minutes of shape-shifting energy left. Will it be enough? Gustav asked the system. It should only take about 15 minutes to extract the data. The system responded. All right, let's do this then, Gustav said internally as he arrived in front of the door that had the number 29 above it. He walked in after using a print cube that belonged to the doctor. The instantly he got in, he found himself in what looked like a hall of cryogenic pillar-sized tubes. The internal structure of the room was much bigger than how it's seen from the outside. This was made possible through the shrinking space technology that was possible in this day and age, but it was only applied to some special types of buildings. Gustav looked around and could not even see a single person in sight. This place was devoid of living creatures except for himself, but there were cams monitoring, so he had to be careful with his actions. The cryogenic pillar-sized tubes were all colored gray, so it was impossible to see what was within, but it was quite obvious that corpses were kept within all of them. Each had number tags attached to their tops, so Gustav instantly scanned the entire place using God eyes and found tag 982 in a few seconds. He moved towards the far end of the northwest side of the room and arrived in front of one of the pillar-like tubes. Beep! 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 After tapping a few holographic buttons by the side, a loud mechanical opening sound was heard. The front of the tube slid open, and a stretcher-like platform where a corpse with a massive hole in its torso area was strapped to shifted outwards. It stretched towards the front, and placed the body strapped to it in a horizontal position. Gustav stared at the familiar dried-up corpse beside him, and emotions began to well up from within again. "Boss Danzo," he mumbled with a low tone as tears gathered in his eyes. He quickly placed his palm on his face and forced the tears back, not wanting any to drop. "There's no time to waste. We'll come back to give you a proper burial rite," Gustav said internally before stretching his right hand out. "Are you ready?" he asked the system. "Ready. Do it," the system responded. Gustav nodded slightly, and placed his palm on Boss Danzo's dried-up face. Processing brain waves reanimation. Chapter 737. "Ready. Do it," the system responded. Gustav nodded slightly, and placed his palm on Boss Danzo's dried-up face. Processing brain waves reanimation. A system notification popped up in his line of sight as a transparent red glow appeared on Gustav's fingertips. Reanimating brain last vestiges, 0/100%, 27/100%, 45/100%. Gustav waited for the bar that appeared above the percentage readings to fill up. 69/100%, 92/100%, 100/100%. In about 4 minutes, it was done. Reanimation complete. Preparing to withdraw data. Bypassing brain cells immunocode. 100/100%. Processing data withdrawal. The red glow on Gustav's fingertips became brighter and strands of the glow pierced into Boss Danzo's face, causing his skull to light up from within. 1/100%. Gustav could tell this part of the process would take long because it was already slower than the former. The system had given him an estimate of 15 minutes for the completion. 5 minutes had already gone by since he started this operation, so around 10 minutes were left till this was completed. This room had cameras positioned in several spots. Still, the closest cam to Gustav only allowed him to be seen from the front where the cryogenic pillar-like tube blocked half of Gustav's frame. Of course, if they decided to make the cam focus more on Gustav from the control room to see what he was up to properly, the angle wouldn't matter since cams were multifunctional these days. However, there was no reason to do that since the securities placed there could see that he was a doctor and was probably busy examining the corpse. They would only be alarmed if someone was trying to move a corpse out of this place. Gustav would occasionally move his left hand like he was doing something surgical to not arouse suspicions. He hoped spending more than 15 minutes in here would not cause any problems for him. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the building, the medical personnel who helped Gustav with the device where Boss Danzo's corpse information was kept was currently walking down a corridor. She arrived in the middle and turned to the right to move towards the office door. Calm. She knocked on the door softly, and tried to slide it open. Noticing it was locked, she brought out a small black cube and placed it in front of the left side of the door. Catching the door slid towards the side, opening up for her. She stared at the empty office before her and could see the office table and chair up ahead. A holographic computer was in sleep mode but still had some tabs on display. She looked around and couldn't see anything out of place in the office. Then, turning to the side, she could see the rectangular-shaped locker placed against the wall. All doctors who had offices had this rectangular-shaped locker within, where they could keep their normal outfits before changing into medical outfits. Most of them never used it since they could keep their things in their spatial storage devices and carry them around with them. The lady medical personnel moved towards the rectangular-shaped locker and stood in front of it. "The moment you notice anything suspicious at all, give me a call so long as it is related to Danzo's corpse." She recalled the words of one of the male MBO officers who arrived here to give the order for them to report anyone who comes looking for Boss Danzo's corpse. Remembering how Dr. Marklin acted opposite to his original personality, she felt something was up. Especially when it was related to checking out Boss Danzo's corpse. The MBO officer had said anything suspicious that was noticed should be reported to him instantly regardless of what it was. She felt there was only one reason a person would act opposite to their original personality was when they were up to something. Her colleague said she was reading into it too much, and he probably woke up happy today or something, but she didn't feel this was the case. She had contacted the MBO officer a while back, and he said to check Dr. Markland's office covertly for anything out of place while he would be on his way. She got the override cube that opened every office door within the medical center from the control room and was able to gain access to Dr. Markland's office. She tried opening up the rectangular-shaped locker, but it wasn't responding. It turned out the cube didn't work for that. After opening it several times more, she gave up and moved to the office table area. She began checking for anything out of place around the table, and eventually moved towards the computer to switch it back on and skim through the files there. She had no idea that the real Dr. Markland's unconscious body was within the rectangular-shaped locker. Fortunately, the override cube didn't work on it. A few minutes later, a thin-looking man with knife-shaped spiky blue hair arrived within the office. From the presence he carried, one could tell he was quite the powerful mixed blood. A red-haired lady wearing a back-eye mask that covered only her eyes area stood beside him with a crossbow-shaped red device in her grasp. "Did you find anything?" he asked the moment he came in. "Nothing, Officer Reiner, but believe me, he acted suspiciously. He never tells anyone." "Thank you. And neither is he ever polite," the female medical personnel voiced out. It seems a bit far-fetched, but I was the one who told you to report anything no matter what it is to me, so I have no right to complain," Officer Reiner said while looking around the office. He moved around, trying to see if he could find anything related to secret communication devices. Right now, the only theory was the possibility of Dr. Markland being controlled or working in secret for an unknown entity related to the Gustav incident. They had no idea Gustav had stolen his identity. Chapter 738. "Violet, go find him while I check this place out," Officer Reiner voiced out, and proceeded to move towards the office chair. "I will take you to where he is," the female medical personnel voiced out and led the way out. The red-haired lady wearing the eye mask followed the medical personnel out after hearing this. Officer Reiner began to check through the holographic computer. Meanwhile, in the cold room, Gustav stared at the notification bar in front of him as he waited. Data withdrawal process, 62/100%. It will probably still take around 4 minutes for this to be done, Gustav thought as he waited. He felt like he was disrespecting Boss Danzo's corpse this way, so he hoped this would be over and done with quickly. He stared at the massive hole in the middle of Boss Danzo's corpse for the umpteenth time, and the guilt within him kept rising. Gustav had already apologized a number of times, but he still felt it wasn't enough. The longer he stayed here, the more negative emotions continued to rise within him. Data withdrawal process, 84/100%, less than 2 minutes left now. Gustav sighed in relief as he felt this whole charade would come to an end soon. His senses were currently spread across the entire 13th floor, so he could sense the medical personnel moving to and fro. Sometimes, there would be no single person walking across the corridor for more than 3 minutes. In the next moment, his eyes widened in suspicion as he sensed the arrival of 2 figures on this floor. Why is there a strong mixed blood on this floor with medical personnel? And she's holding an item which has power contained within too, Gustav analyzed. He could sense the outline of the item in her grasp and felt it was shaped like a crossbow, which made him feel even more suspicious. Something's up, Gustav instantly came to this conclusion as they walked along the corridor, moving closer and closer to the area where the door of the cold room was situated. Data withdrawal process, 87/100%. He stared at the notification bar again and gritted his teeth. Hopefully, I'm just being too cautious. Even with this thought, Gustav wished he could speed up the process. In the next moment, Gustav realized how wrong his last thoughts were as these 2 arrived right in front of the door to the cold room he was within. Damn it! Gustav cursed underneath his breath. Down in Dr. Markland's office, Officer Reiner had checked everything he could within the system in the last 4 minutes, and couldn't find anything suspicious. He moved from place to place around the office again to see if he missed anything that finally arrived in front of the rectangular locker. This was the only place he hadn't checked so far, so he was curious. He tried opening it, which of course failed. He realized it could only be opened using specific keys and shrunk back a bit. This place seems more suspicious than all. I might find something within, he thought and looked around. Since there's no other way, I might as well do this, he voiced out as blue blades shot out from his hair. Thwai! Thwai! Both blades stabbed into two different sides of the locker and glowed up. Zzz, they cut fine rectangular-shaped lines in front and flew back to his head. In the next instant, the metal still sticking to the locker fell out, displaying a hole within. But then Officer Reiner's eyes widened as clothes began to fall out of the locker. He quickly moved closer and tried to hold them, but the clothes were pouring out like crazy as if the place was stacked full of clothes beyond its capacity, and it was just waiting to burst out. Even when the clothes had already formed a pile in front, there was still a lot of clothes within. How can someone call himself a doctor and be so unhygienic? Officer Reiner felt frustrated as he saw all this and tried to pack the clothes to the side. He touched the clothes still on the inside and was able to tell that there were still so many more. Officer Reiner! He suddenly heard a call from the communication tool strapped to the side of his head. Yes? He answered. We are unable to get through the cold room door. The voice that belonged to his female subordinate could be heard from the other side. What? Is the nurse not over there with you? He asked. She is. The entry cube worked, but for some reason, the door won't slide open. I'm on my way, he voiced out and proceeded to turn to the side to leave the office. He initially wanted to sort through the clothes even though he considered it a waste of time, but he couldn't ignore this call. If he had sorted through the clothes, he would have found Dr. Markland's body underneath all that pile. Gustav placed some oxygen nodes in Dr. Markland's nose before packing all of those clothes on him. The clothes were actually from Gustav's storage, and that setup was done just in case anything went wrong. On the 13th floor, Officer Reiner arrived within the corridor and rushed to meet up with his subordinate. I've tried over and over, but it's like the door is stuck, the female medical personnel voiced out while reaching out the cube towards the door once more. I wanted to ask for permission to use lethal force, Violet voiced out. Don't. Your attack ability has a wide area of concentration. Officer Reiner instantly turned her down. Meanwhile, within the cold room, Gustav was standing in place sweating while his concentration was focused on the door area. Gravitational manipulation was currently active as he made the door several times heavier than it was supposed to, which was why it wasn't opening up. However, this was costing Gustav a lot of energy, and he was currently weak, so even though he had kept it up for around 2 minutes, he was sweating a lot. Chapter 739. However, this was costing Gustav a lot of energy. He was currently weak, so even though he had kept it up for around 2 minutes, he was sweating a lot. Data withdrawal process, 99/100%, almost done, Gustav said internally as he sensed the 3 figures outside the door. He could already tell that one was about to attack. From the view outside, Officer Reiner stood in front of the door, while both ladies gave him a little distance on the sides. 2 blades shot out from the top of his head and flew towards the door. The door suddenly slid open before the collision was made, and the blades ended up flying through the entrance. Oh, it opened! The female medical personnel behind voiced out. Both MBO officers were surprised to see it had slid open contrary to the initial situation. Maybe it was stuck, the female medical personnel added as she moved towards the entrance. Grab! Officer Reiner grabbed her shoulder from behind and pulled her to the side with a suspicious look on his face. Stay behind us, he stated while walking forward with his subordinate, Officer Violet. Shin! The blades flew out earlier returned back to his head in the next moment, but he allowed them to float around his head this time instead of joining to his hair as they were supposed to. Violet held the weapon in her hand slightly upwards, ready to use it the moment she felt the need to. Calm! They could already hear footsteps from within as they got to the entrance. Officer Reiner and Violet both voiced out as they spotted Dr. Marklin walking towards the entrance from the northeast side. He had just passed through the midst of some cryogenic pillar tubes and arrived at the front, where he had to turn towards the left to arrive on the path that led to the entrance. The entrance wasn't too far off from his position after turning, and he seemed to be tapping on some holographic projections being displayed from a watch on his right wrist like he was computing some data. The two officers took a few steps forward and paused their movements. They looked around the massive hall-sized cold room. They couldn't see anyone else within except for Dr. Marklin, who was approaching their position. Oh! Dr. Marklin suddenly paused his footsteps as he acted like he was just seeing them. The holographic projection floating above the watch on his right wrist disappeared as he discarded what he was doing. Officers from the MBO? Dr. Marklin voiced out with a tone of surprise as he saw their uniforms. Dr. Marklin, right? Officer Reiner inquired. Yes, he responded with a tone of confirmation. Can we have a brief discussion outside? I want to ask you some questions, Officer Reiner said with a tone of seriousness. Dr. Marklin nodded in response while Violet walked forward and turned to the right. She began headed in the same direction Dr. Marklin was coming from earlier. The female medical personnel who followed them directed Violet towards the area where Boss Danzo's corpse was kept. Dr. Marklin acted normal and followed Officer Reiner out to talk at the entrance. Officer Reiner began asking questions about why he was here and what he was doing with the corpse. Examining it, of course. There are still investigations going on, and as mentioned earlier, he died like the rest. However, he was murdered directly. Dr. Marklin began answering the questions professionally. Officer Reiner made sure to read his expressions as he answered the questions he posed. Meanwhile, Violet was currently inspecting Boss Danzo's corpse with the female medical personnel. They were checking if anything was amiss which might prove that Dr. Marklin was truly up to suspicious acts. Yes, the investigation wasn't completed according to the police since they have determined how close Gustav Crimson is to Danzo. It is believed he wouldn't kill him. This leads to the theory of the enemies being at fault, just like the eyewitnesses say. After a few minutes, Violet walked out of the cold room with the female medical personnel, and they reported to Officer Reiner that they didn't find anything suspicious. Boss Danzo's corpse was intact, almost like it was never touched. At this time, Officer Reiner had also finished questioning Dr. Marklin. There was nothing to use against Dr. Marklin, as it could even be said that he was helping the situation with the examination he was conducting. Just as they would let Dr. Marklin go, Violet proposed she did a quick scan. Oh, you want to check him out? Officer Reiner asked. Yes, she responded. Okay, do as you wish. After this, well, let him go. Dr. Marklin, who heard this, squinted his eyes a little in confusion, not understanding what they were talking about. He suddenly felt a sense of foreboding as he saw Violet place her hand on the eye mask wrapped around her upper face. She slowly lifted it up, revealing a pair of glowing azure-colored eyeballs. This energy. It's the same as. As this thought appeared in his mind, Dr. Marklin turned around. At the same time, Officer Violet slowly raised her head to stare in his direction. Whoosh! To everyone's surprise, a burst of wind blasted across the place as Dr. Marklin disappeared from their line of sight. He's running. We're going after him. Officer Reiner shouted out and charged forward. Officer Violet was quick in reacting, and both of them ran forward as well. Their speeds, too, weren't shabby as they arrived in front of the teleporting elevator at the end of the corridor, leaving the female medical personnel in awe. They were gone as well in the next moment. Gustav, who had been imitating Dr. Marklin's identity all this time, had to escape before Officer Violet could lay her eyes on him. Right now, he was headed towards the second floor where Dr. Marklin's office was located. At the same time, the two officers chased after him. Chapter 740. They were obviously not as fast as he was. Still, they both took the teleportation elevator while Gustav dashed towards the stairway area on the left. The teleportation elevator took a few seconds before it would teleport a person towards their desired floor, which was why Gustav had to move towards the stairway to avoid getting caught or having Violet's eyes on him. Even though Violet couldn't see him directly, she could still see through some floors within the building structures, so they planned to cut him off at a particular floor since they would arrive before he did. To both their surprise, Gustav suddenly disappeared from Violet's range of eye detection when they arrived on the 7th floor. He was initially on the 8th floor, then he suddenly disappeared. Both of them instantly began looking around the place for him. Meanwhile, Gustav actually leaped out of one of the windows on the 8th floor since he had already determined that falling from this height down to the 2nd floor would lead him directly to Dr. Marklin's office. Hover has been activated. The instant he arrived on a window side of the 2nd floor, his body paused in midair. Gustav flew a little bit forward and went in through the window. He had arrived within Dr. Marklin's office. He looked around and could see the mess created from cutting open the rectangular locker by the side. Gustav moved towards it and pulled off the rest of the clothes on the locker, revealing a white-haired man who seemed to be around 40 years of age. This was the real Dr. Marklin, and he was currently in his undies since Gustav had to wear his clothes. Gustav wasted no time picking Dr. Marklin up and clothing him as fast as he could before wearing a new piece of clothing. Flesh-wriggling sounds could be heard as Gustav transformed back into the dark skin and afro-styled hair identity he used earlier. He then proceeded to lift Dr. Marklin, who was still unconscious, by his neck and slammed his head onto the side of the office table. Bam! Blood rolled down the left side of his head as Gustav proceeded to drop his body and dash towards the window area. Swoosh! He leaped out the window once, flying across the streets and disappearing out of sight in a few moments. Meanwhile, Violet scanned across the building on the 6th floor with her vision as they looked for Dr. Marklin. "I found him," she suddenly voiced out as she stared at a particular area beneath. "Where?" Officer Reiner asked. "In his office, but he seems unconscious," she responded. "Let's go," Officer Reiner shouted out as they charged towards the nearest teleportation elevator. Zing! In a few seconds they arrived on the 2nd floor and began making their way to Dr. Marklin's office. People on the entire floor were startled as they saw the state of things with these powerful MBO officers running around. They were in Dr. Marklin's office after a few seconds and saw him lying on the floor, passed out while bleeding from the side of his head. Violet spotted the bloodstain on the side of the table in front of him and the clothes on the floor behind. "I think he tripped," she voiced out. Officer Reiner, who had also noticed this, moved forward and brought out a medicinal pill from his storage device. He squatted in front of Dr. Marklin and fed him the pill. Flicker! Flicker! After a few minutes, Dr. Marklin opened his eyes to see two figures dressed in MBO uniforms standing in front of him. What happened? Why am I on the floor?" he slowly muttered as he sat up. "Why were you running?" Officer Reiner questioned him with a suspicious tone. What are you talking about?" Dr. Marklin asked with a look of confusion. Gustav arrived back at the lab 5 minutes before the timer for his shape-shifting went out. "That was close," he sighed as he slowly transformed back into his original looks. "Why were those officers there? Did I make a mistake?" Gustav wondered as he tried analyzing the situation. "The nurse with them. I saw her at the casualty documentation office." Gustav recalled the face of the lady who gave him the documentation device for Boss Danzo's corpse. "Whatever I did, it must be related to the identity of that doctor. She probably found something about me fishy." Gustav instantly put 2 and 2 together, understanding the situation. He already knew Boss Danzo's corpse was under inspection, so he could tell all this was concerning the identity he took and looking for Boss Danzo's corpse. He was just glad he got away without having to do anything disastrous. Earlier, the MBO female officer wanted to scan him with her eyes, and Gustav could sense had similar energy with God eyes. The moment she stared at him directly with those eyes, she would instantly be able to see through his shape-shifting. His original bloodline was something he wished to remain a secret, or it would cause many problems for him. Gustav knew that if it became known that he could mimic people's identity, the usefulness of his bloodline would drastically reduce. The authorities after him would be on a watch out, and the technology to see through shape-shifting would definitely be massively issued out. Then there would be no point in having the power since it could be seen through. He had to keep it a secret that he could mimic people's identity so they'd never see it coming. This bloodline ability was so uncommon that any talk about a shapeshifter that could mimic the identity of people had not been heard of in up to 100 years. In this age of technology, there were see-throughs that could be used to identify if a person tried to disguise as another person, but presently, they weren't used actively. Gustav felt if anyone besides Miss Amy and those who already knew of his original bloodline found out about the secret, he'd have to silence them forever. Chapter 741. Gustav felt if anyone besides Miss Amy and those who already knew of his original bloodline found out about the secret, he'd have to silence them forever. The two officers would have found out that he had such an ability, which would lead to the MBO and the whole world finding out as well. He didn't want to cause more death than he already had, but I already killed close to 3,000 people. What's two more? This was Gustav's thought process at the moment. He wasn't trying to escape earlier for himself. He was trying to escape for their sake. Anyways, the first step of the plan is complete, Gustav said as he took a seat in front of one of the holographic computers. Are you ready to transfer the data now? Gustav asked the system. Affirmative. Go ahead and place your hands on it. The system responded. H&M. Gustav nodded slightly in response and proceeded to place his hand on the holographic monitor. Data transfer from archive 0019254827777452 in process. Huh! Why are the numbers so many? Gustav voiced OU. 'Cause I have a lot of data in here, the system replied with a scoff. Oh. Universal data, Gustav muttered underneath his breath. He couldn't fathom just how much information the system had gathered within. The system had said it would reveal things to him as time passed, but he still only knew a little, and sometimes he wondered if the system would actually reveal stuff like it claimed. Hey, your longing is quite disturbing. I said it'll reveal things little by little, okay? The system suddenly voiced in his head. I didn't say nothing, Gustav stated with a scoff. Yeah? But I could sense it. I live inside you. The system girly voice repeatedly echoed in his head, causing Gustav to hold his head. Hey, stop it, Gustav stated with a slight look of annoyance. It's still weird hearing a girl's voice in my head saying I live inside you, UG. Gustav said this, but he was completely used to the presence of the system right now. Oh? Is the Virgin worried because things are supposed to be the other way around? Perv. The girly giggling voice of the system echoed in his head. Shut it. Gustav wished the system had a physical body so he could just pull her ears whenever it started speaking like this. Of course you'd want that. I look this way because of you, and now you even want a physical body for me. You really want to have your way with me, eh? The system tried mimicking a seductive tone as it teased Gustav. Hey, stop being creepy. Since when did you start sensing things without me thinking about them? Gustav was curious, knowing the system couldn't do this before. Since when our bond increased. The more we accept each other, the tighter our connection becomes. Feelings and thoughts wise. The system explained. Who accepted you? I didn't. You're still very annoying, Gustav voiced with a slight stutter. Hee, of course, you'll deny it. Just like you denied falling in love with Angie. Oh, I remember, Heyra's a term for people like you. Sundara, the system stated and began laughing maniacally. Lines appeared on Gustav's forehead as his face squeezed up. Just as he was about to respond, a system notification popped up in his line of sight. Data from archive 0019254827777452 successfully transferred. It's done, Gustav said with a longing gaze as he stared at the monitor in front of him. Video file received. This was displayed on the holographic monitor in front, along with a play button. Gustav looked a bit emotional as he raised his hand to tap on the play button. Time to check this out. Truant at the top of a massive floating structure above a blossoming city, a figure could be seen flying towards the structure. The floating structure looked like a chunk of rock the size of a building, ash in color. So it had been here this whole time, and it was invisible and impossible to sense? The figure flying upwards was startled as they noticed the structure. "Hey, Red Shadow, I found it," she voiced out through a communication device as the wind caused her jacket to flap. "That's great, young miss. You just have to disarm it using the T-67 now." Red Shadow responded through the communication device. The figure flying towards the structure happened to be Miss Amy. Strange purplish energy surrounded her as she flew upwards. In the next moment, she arrived in front of the massive chunk and could see a weird cone-shaped device protruding from the top. She flew a little higher and floated towards the device protruding from the top of the massive chunk of ash-colored rock. Beep! 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 A faint beeping sound echoed in her ear as she approached it, and brought out a 3 feet long cylindrical-shaped device. This was the T-67 device Gustav and Red Shadow found past the mixed-breed borders behind the neighborhood a year back. Just as Miss Amy landed on the chunk of rock. Beep! 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 The beeping sound suddenly became extremely fast, and this was when Miss Amy noticed the pinky finger-sized timer placed by the side of the device. 2 minutes, it suddenly went from 2 minutes to 1 second, 1 second. Miss Amy's eyes widened as she charged forward with the T-67 device in her grip. Boom! From the intensity of her speed, half of the floating platform behind her got blasted into smithereens, and from below, it sounded like an explosion went off in the sky, causing the citizens of the city to look upwards. Miss Amy had already seen the keyhole where she was supposed to put it, so she instantly shoved it into the hole and turned it anti-clockwise. Midnight in the last millisecond, Miss Amy managed to deactivate whatever this piece of machinery was. It slowly powered down since there were about 7 more milliseconds before the 1 second was up. Miss Amy was fast enough to deactivate it in less than a second. Chapter 742. After handling the unexpected situation, she sighed in relief but then suddenly sensed something and turned around. She was currently high up in the clouds due to where this platform was located, so even looking behind her, all that could be seen were clouds. However, Miss Amy was powerful enough to see beyond all that. Her eyes widened as she charged forward, but the moment she did, a loud blast rang out. Boom! Unlike the one where her speed caused it, this explosion happened in the far eastern part of the city within the sky. Miss Amy was currently 700 miles away from there, yet she blitzed at a speed that made her close in the distance in a few seconds, but even with all that speed, she was too late. A gray-colored fog had covered the skies in this part of the sky. It kept spreading, and it looked like the city underneath would be consumed in no time. "Young miss, what's going on? Didn't you deactivate it?" Red Shadow's startled voice could be heard coming from the communication device. "We got fooled. There were 2 of them," Miss Amy responded. "What? 2? Damn it! What are we going to do now?" Red Shadow asked with a worried tone. "I'm sure both were set to go off at the same time, which means it will be less effective and spread slower with just one going off. Evacuate the citizens from the eastern part of the city as quickly as you can. I'll do my best to slow the spread and disperse as much as possible," Miss Amy voiced out as the purplish ore-like energy surrounding her increased in output. This was the far eastern part of the sky in the city, so beyond it were road routes that led outside the city, which was mostly void of life. Miss Amy spread her hands, and a whitish glow covered them. 2 massive items began forming in her hand as the gray fog kept spreading till they covered even her. All of a sudden, a loud whooshing sound reverberated in the sky as 2 massive objects could be seen moving in the sky. The cloud of ashy fog suddenly got blown backwards by a lot. The citizens beneath stared at the sky with a look of astonishment and confusion, wondering how half of the fog that was already looming over a large quarter of the city was suddenly blown back. High up in the sky, Miss Amy could be seen holding onto the handles of 2 massive hand fans. The hand fans were each the size of 4-story buildings, so it looked like she was holding a massive building in one hand and another in the second hand. Miss Amy swung out both fans once again at the same time, causing an immense gust of wind to blow back the ashy fog once again, decreasing the range of its spread. Meanwhile, on the ground in the city, Red Shadow was working with some MBO agents, helping the citizens evacuate the city. Ruckus! Ruckus! Come on, move this way! There's no time! He shouted out as he pulled some kids out of the hovered bus bringing them back from school. He stretched his hand forward, and a star-shaped reddish light appeared. Go! He shouted to them. All of them ran forward one after the other and disappeared the moment they went through the red star-shaped light. The entire vicinity was crowded with panicking crowds, and vehicles had blocked the roads due to people who had already been evacuated leaving their vehicles behind. The MBO agents moved swiftly as well, leaping towards the buildings by the side, where workers were situated and bringing them down. Red Shadow would open multiple portals simultaneously, which led to the outskirts of the city over at the west side. The range of the fog they were trying to protect everyone from was only within the city. Move, come on! Red Shadow hurriedly helped another 20 people teleport away. This part of the city had at least 20,000 people living in it, and so far, he had only managed to help around 10% of that. He knew they didn't have much time because even though Miss Amy was helping reduce the speed of the spread, they were still dealing with gases in this situation, so there was no way some of it wouldn't mix with the oxygen in the air and become invisible. It would soon start having little effect on the surroundings regardless. They had requested for more help from the MBO to move the people away faster, which was why more MBO agents were arriving on the scene. But even with the amount of MBO officers on the scene, it would still take a lot of time to get everyone out of here. In the sky, Miss Amy had fanned a lot of the ashy fog back with just brute strength alone that it looked like the skies had cleared, but this was far from the case. Miss Amy could sense a greater pressure than before coming from upwards where she had fanned the ashy fog to. Suddenly, boom! There was another outburst of the ashy fog as they spread across thousands of feet instantly. They were spreading out way more violently than before, catching even Miss Amy by surprise. It was almost as if they had sentience as a massive amount of them formed a gigantic upside tornado in the sky, charging towards Miss Amy with the tip. Miss Amy raised both massive fans again and swung them out with force. For whom an outburst of wind blasted forth, and slammed into the massive upside-down ashy fog tornado. Even though it was the size of a skyscraper, the violent wind crashed into it and dispersed it instantly. However, as it dispersed, more ashy fog suddenly burst forth in every direction, instantly covering Miss Amy's small figure up in the middle of the sky. It's starting to consume my protective energy field? Miss Amy sensed the purplish ore-like energy surrounding her, thinning out as she found herself within the sea of fog. Chapter 743. It's starting to consume my protective energy field? Miss Amy sensed the purple ore-like energy surrounding her, thinning out as she found herself within the sea of fog. At this point, she remembered information about this ashy fog when she was making her findings with Red Shadow. For the last year, Miss Amy and Red Shadow had been on a mission together to find out what the T-67 device Gustav and Red Shadow found beyond the border was linked to. Government scientists had inspected it back then and revealed that it was a key to a piece of technology, and it held a lot of power. Hence, the piece of technology was definitely nothing to be scoffed at. Not only was it a key, but it was also a generator that was actually powering up the main piece of technology regardless of the distance between them. They revealed that destroying it could cause disastrous consequences, so that wasn't an option. They had to find the main piece of technology. The person who had created this T-67 device was Sahil and his boss, Sharmax. Sahil looked like a boss himself, but he was actually a lackey compared to Sharmax, who remained uncaught to date. Sharmax was said to have escaped to another planet when he knew the MBO was onto him. He knew he would be caught eventually, so he didn't want to risk staying behind. Miss Amy was able to round up every single person he worked with within the last year using the scattered info she gathered. They revealed they were working on a poisonous explosive device and Sharmak's assistant, Sahil, just happened to be conducting illegal activities after his boss had disappeared. At this time, the main piece of technology had been completed and sent to a particular location. According to them, the timer on it had been activated, and when the explosive device went off, an ashy poisonous fog would consume an entire city in a matter of seconds, degrading the cells of every living creature within and rewriting them. It was meant to be an insane test, and Sharmax was plotting to see how it would end up. The henchman barely had enough information to give about this explosive device, especially its location still remained unknown and was unable to be found by satellites even after checking. The MBO sent several agents to go after Sahil and failed to catch him so many times until Gustav intervened. At that time, Miss Amy was still gathering information about the main explosive device from so many other places while Gustav was catching Sahil. After Sahil was caught, it took some time for them to get information out of him, but Miss Amy managed to make that possible. Unfortunately, even though Sahil had more information to give than the rest, it still wasn't enough, but he did manage to reveal the others involved in the experiment, as well as the supposed city where the explosive device was located. Miss Amy and Red Shadow moved to the supposed location, which was Dharma City, the neighboring North City, to Vehicle City, while Gustav traveled to go see Boss Danzo. They checked Dharma City and couldn't find any signs of the explosive device no matter how much they checked. Even with Miss Amy's level of strength, and the way she could spread her perception all across the entire city, she was still unable to find anything of the sort. They began to question whether the device was truly here, but then Sahil had revealed they might need to get information from two other people. One of the two turned out to be completely useless, while the second one, which Miss Amy nearly burned to a crisp underneath the engine of a spacecraft, revealed something about the explosive device. He got a clear Xivarnite from me at the time and told me to keep it a secret, speak in simple man terms. The clear Xivarnite helps to build a material that can cloak an object, literally putting it in another space, so it doesn't occupy normal space. It's like this. Whatever gets cloaked is there, but at the same time, it's not. It cannot be accessed, seen or sensed until the Varnite is deactivated. How do I do that? You have to get a. This was how Miss Amy's last conversation with the other person went. It turned out that the explosive device was built using this Varnite substance, so it couldn't be accessed because it was like it wasn't there. The only time it would be revealed was when the timer was coming to an end. Miss Amy took the necessary steps as directed and was able to finally expose the explosive device in a part of the sky that she had initially checked. This showed just how powerful the device was. Miss Amy had practically disarmed it, but what no one mentioned was there were two of the explosive devices. To be more accurate, none of them knew there were two of them. Sharmax had been one hell of a calculative and scheming person that he placed two in different spots. Both of them were revealed at the same time, but Miss Amy found one first and only sensed the second one at the last second. Within the ashy fog, Miss Amy remembered that when they asked everyone about the information on the ashy fog, they revealed it had sentience and was capable of taking actions on its own. It also got more vibrant and effective the longer it remained exposed to oxygen, which meant the fog would only get stronger and stronger, and no one knew the effect it would have on people. There was also a probability that this city wouldn't be the only casualty after it had consumed it, since it would get stronger with time. Having sentience just made it even more dangerous. Looks like I have to take off my seal, Miss Amy thought. She initially felt that wouldn't be necessary, but seeing the state of things, she knew she had to get serious before things escalated beyond control. Chapter 744. From below, Red Shadow could see the sky above already covered by ashy fog, which was extending at an insane speed. He gritted his teeth and burned his bloodline energy, creating a massive red star up front which was as large as a skyscraper. "Everyone quickly!" he shouted to the people in the vicinity with his hands stretched out as his entire body glowed with dark red light. Some MBO agents picked up multiple people and threw them into the red star up ahead. Multiple people could enter this one at once, unlike the others, where they could only enter at a time. Usually, Red Shadow never creates a portal this large due to the way it sapped a lot of energy, but seeing the way they were about to be consumed by the fog soon, he decided to do this. Red Shadow pulled his hand back and pushed it forward with force. Shroom, the massive red star, drove forward with speed, swallowing up everything in the vicinity as it moved, vehicles and people included. Just with this action alone, he had already managed to send over 300 people away in a matter of seconds. "We need more time!" he shouted out as he saw the fog drawing nearer and nearer with intensity. They had managed to evacuate 80% of the population of people living around here in 20 minutes. More and more MBO officers were arriving on the scene, and none of them even tried to take on the fog after hearing that the Demon Queen was already dealing with it. They focused on helping the citizens out of this area since they felt if she couldn't handle it, then none of them could. Seeing the buildings and everything behind them getting consumed by the ashy fog, Dark Shadow prepared to unleash another massive teleportation star. All of a sudden, a massive spike of energy blasted forth from within the ashy fog. The ashy fog was thick, and the moment it flew past a particular area, anything that was visible in that area before would no longer be visible, but everyone could see a figure within the ashy fog, this time covered in purplish energy that blasted across the place. The ground began to quake from the outburst of energy coming from this being, and the ashy-colored fog initially headed in their direction suddenly got dispersed as a purplish wave consumed it. They initially thought they would be affected, but the purplish wave suddenly stopped and created a massive wall behind them. The whole place instantly became calm. They couldn't see what was going on beyond the purplish wall, but Red Shadow could sense the outburst of energy and felt Miss Amy had gone all out right now. If they weren't being protected by the purplish wall, they would most likely be affected. Beyond the wall, Miss Amy was flying at an insane speed around the wave of ashy fog, sealing it from spreading with her purplish energy. No matter how much more powerful the fog had become in the last 20 minutes, even with its sentience, it couldn't contend with Miss Amy in this state. Fly, Miss Amy circulated around the fog at speed way faster than light, using his purplish energy to tear lines in space. A dimensional rift suddenly appeared on the east, cackling with destructive energy and bluish and purplish light. An immense suction force came from it, and it began pulling the fog into it. In the next moment, another rift had appeared on the west. And in the next on the north, south, northwest, southwest. In a matter of seconds, 7 rifts had been created, and they were each in a position that surrounded the ashy fog from every direction. Some were so high in the sky while some were placed just a few feet above the ground, but they were still in a position where they had encircled the ashy fog. Each rift carried an intense amount of suction force that was powerful enough to wipe an entire city off the map, but since they surrounded each other, they cancelled out the force that would spread out to the surroundings. Instead, the ashy fog in the middle was being sucked from every direction into the dimensional rifts, leaving it no chance to escape. Miss Amy stayed in the middle. Her gray-colored hair floated in the air as her eyes glowed the same purplish color with the powerful energy surrounding her. Even with the intense suction force coming from every direction that would rip a person to shreds in an instant, she remained unaffected. A shriek was heard as a part of the ashy fog formed a massive cone-shaped head with 2 dark eyes. It flew towards Miss Amy and slammed into the protective purplish energy surrounding her. To its disappointment, it was unable to break through no matter how much it tried. It couldn't even get closer than 20 feet to her. Miss Amy waved her hand once with a nonchalant expression. A massive claw made from purplish energy appeared in midair and swiped at the massive cone-shaped head formed by the ashy fog. Even before the collision was made, the immense force from the claw dispersed the fog instantly, causing even more winds to be generated across the place. This made the fog clear out even faster, as that part got pushed into the rift on the west. In a few more minutes, the entire place had become clear as every remainder of ash-colored fog in the area completely cleared out. The rifts in the vicinity were slowly shrinking as well. This was normal since space always repaired itself when torn, but depending on the size of the rift, the duration would either be shorter or longer. Miss Amy stood in place high up in the sky, waiting for the rifts to completely disappear before she deactivated the cocoon of the purplish wave she surrounded the place with. At this point, Red Shadow and the other MBO agents had managed to evacuate everyone living in this part of the city. Chapter 745. At this point, Red Shadow and the other MBO agents had managed to evacuate everyone living in this part of the city. After Miss Amy deactivated the purplish walls and cocoons surrounding the place, the skies were clear. There was nothing to be seen beyond destruction behind the parts where Red Shadow and the MBO officers initially were. The buildings, roads, and everything in sight had been completely decimated. It made the place look like a ghost town. Beyond the point where Miss Amy activated, the purplish wall remained intact, but behind was like a wilderness. Miss Amy slowly floated down from the sky and landed on the spot within the decimated part of the city. The damage isn't as bad, she thought as she inspected the vicinity. This was how Miss Amy felt because she knew just how powerful the rifts were, and the havoc they could have caused if she hadn't let them cancel out the force of their pull by making them surround each other. However, if another person saw this amount of destruction, they would freak out because even the outskirts of the city were affected. Miss Amy looked forward and flew off from this point. Regardless of how bad things were going to get, there was no way Miss Amy wouldn't have been able to handle dealing with the explosive fog. Sharmax didn't expect his plan to be foiled by the most powerful female mixed blood on the planet. It would have been a problem if she could never find it, but from the moment she did, the plan was destined to be foiled even though he unexpectedly created 2 of the explosive devices. Miss Amy would have much preferred it if they never went off, so she wouldn't have to resort to extreme measures. But nobody had expected what happened today. Red Shadow and the rest of the MBO agents were still trying to get the citizens from another part of the city out even though Miss Amy had already handled the situation. Miss Amy supported this action because it was a gaseous explosion, and some parts might have mixed with the oxygen in the city, which would make the air poisonous in some parts even though it was invisible. The effect would most likely reduce a lot, but still, it would be safer to get everyone out of here and detoxify the air in the entire city. Miss Amy decided to request for an alpha-ranked mixed blood currently on Earth to show up in the city. "Rilia, how fast can you get here?" Dash. "I never thought you'd ever call for help, lil sis, hee. Just get over here, idiot." Miss Amy voiced out through the call. Dash. "I'm already here." She heard from the other end of the call and paused her flight above a part of the city. The moment she turned around, a beautiful lady with gray and blue-colored hair was floating in midair right behind her. This lady had a slim figure, clad in a red leather gown with a long slit reaching her left thigh. Her busts were almost as massive as Miss Amy's. Albeit faint, she had facial similarities with Miss Amy. "The air is toxic," Miss Amy warned. "Not toxic enough to affect me," she voiced out with a smirk. "We could have used your help earlier," Miss Amy stated with her usual straight face. "I just arrived back on Earth a few hours ago." "Give me a break, lil sis," she responded to Miss Amy by folding her hands and smiling. "Get everyone out of here." Miss Amy didn't even try to sympathize with her, and immediately went straight to the point. "Ugh, no, nice to see you again. I missed you or anything, your straight-up commands. You're no fun, really. Miss Amy called out her name with a tone of discomfort. Sure, Rilia responded while raising her hand and snapping her finger. Pa! In that instant, blue glows appeared all across the city, and everyone left in the city was instantly teleported out of the city towards the border at the north. All the MBO agents and even Red Shadow were also teleported away. Over 100,000 people had been teleported away in one go, towards the same location. Done, she responded with a dissatisfied expression. One more request, Miss Amy stated with mixed expressions on her face. Rilia was a bit surprised to see her poker face crumble. Official? Or personal? She asked with a hint of suspiciousness. I need you to teleport me to Burning Sands City, Miss Amy requested. So it's personal, hee lil sis. You're being sus right now, Rilia said with a teasing expression and began slowly flying around Miss Amy. If you're not going to do it, just say so, Miss Amy said with an undisturbed tone, displaying her poker face once again. I mean, you could just fly there. You're fast enough to arrive there quickly anyway, Rilia pointed out. If I move too quickly, rifts will be created. Also, I have to reactivate the seal soon, Miss Amy explained. Oh, you're still on a leash? TSK, that's not cool, lil sis. What if you're attacked in your weak state? Remember, you're only the strongest when you're at your full strength. Rilia's words made it seem like she was concerned, but her tone of speaking sounded threatening. I welcome anyone who is willing to try. I hope they come prepared to visit the afterlife, Miss Amy voiced out with a strong tone and intense gaze before flying away. Where are you going, lil sis? Rilia voiced out and flew after her. You're wasting my time, Miss Amy responded from up ahead without turning around. I'll wait till do it. I was just messing around, Rilia yelled out as she followed behind Miss Amy. Burning Sands City. It had been 2 days since Gustav infiltrated the medical center to get something related to his plans from Boss Danzo's corpse. At the moment, Gustav was in Sir Zill's lab chatting with Carissa's. Chapter 746. You're going to remain hidden for now and present them with the things I have given you at the appointed time, Gustav stated. Are you sure Marshall is on board with this? Gustav asked. I spoke with him yesterday, Carissa's nodded. All right then. There's still one more thing I need to complete before leaving here, Gustav added. After that, I'll hand everything over to you and Scientist Zill. I will come back after the tide starts turning to get you. At that point, they won't be able to label me with anything extra and try to bring me down than they already have, Gustav mumbled. At the moment, theories were circulating around about how Gustav was working for terrorist organizations because, in some other small city, there were explosions similar to ones that happened in Burning Sands City. A terrorist group came out, claiming they were responsible for the happenings. The city wasn't as grand as Burning Sands City. Neither was the destruction level even close to what Gustav caused, but people began to link it to the one that happened to Burning Sands City. Gustav could tell someone was trying to set him up to look like he was in league with terrorists, which was one of the reasons he knew revealing himself to let them take him in for questioning would be a very bad idea. That would be him setting himself up for execution, since they would just pin everything against him without giving him the chance to explain. The system had snooped around, and he knew that lots of the higher-ups in the MBO were already against Gustav for giving the MBO a bad name, so they wanted him gone. It gave Gustav this information and told him he needed a way to get himself out of this predicament. Now that Gustav understood how things were and the fact that he was being plotted against, he had decided to turn the story about the whole situation around. Yes, he was practically the cause and the villain here, but he had decided to turn things with his plan and pull off fooling the entire world. Gustav had completed 3 phases of his plan in the last 3 days, and now one more was left. Big brother Gustav, will you be okay? Carissa's asked with a look of concern. Will be fine, Gustav responded. Maybe I should call Miss Amy to let her in on my plans. Gustav thought but quickly discarded the idea. He stared at the holographic projection up, which was currently displaying a paused video. Gustav instructed for the video to be played, and it began displaying a person's point of view. Boom! 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 The sounds of an explosion could be heard from the video, and one could see from the view of this person that battles were going on up ahead. When this person turned around, Carissa's and Marshall could be seen in the same encirclement as him, and after saying a few words to them, this person was flung forward with immense speed by both of them. From the point of this person's view, a golden beam was also shot out at the same moment he arrived before Gustav and pushed him out of the way while his body was still being catapulted in midair. As the golden beam tore through him, this person turned to the side to stare at Gustav, who had a look of disbelief and confusion before the video blacked out. We should never have agreed to throw him forward like he asked, Carissa's lamented once again after seeing the footage. I would probably be dead too if you hadn't, Gustav voiced out. No. What? Carice's was truly lost for words as she thought about it too. It turned out that during the battle with the 3 mixed bloods that were sent after them, when Gustav was about to get killed, Boss Danzo had asked Marshall and Carice's to throw him out. They kept questioning what would Boss Danzo do since he was just an ordinary human being. It made sense for both of them to go out and help him, but somehow Boss Danzo was able to convince them. Marshall and Carice's activated their bloodlines. Marshall's bloodline gave him a power boost which helped him in lifting Boss Danzo and flinging him forward, while Carice's made use of her telekinesis to catapult Boss Danzo's body faster in the air, making him arrive before Gustav just when the golden beam was about to be shot out. Carice's had explained to Gustav about how it happened some days back, but Gustav couldn't blame her or Marshall. He would be dead if Boss Danzo didn't show up at the time he did, which would still lead to everyone's death too. It turned out that Gustav's reason for visiting the medical center and coming into contact with Boss Danzo's corpse was to withdraw the data of Boss Danzo's last 5 minutes before death. The system had explained to him that this was possible with its help, and gave Gustav all the necessary requirements. Now, this was another evidence of things that had happened on that day. The authorities were unable to recover any footage from the scenes of destruction. Everything had been reduced to ashes, and even when trying to recover footage, they were unable to. They even called in a popular MBO officer that could reanimate everything that had happened in a particular area within a specific time frame, and his abilities didn't work here either. All this was due to the lingering energy of decimation. Decimation had been both Gustav's bane and help. Even though he saved them and had his revenge, it also prevented the authorities from getting the truth about how the whole incident began. Now Gustav was trying to rewrite the whole scenario with everything he had gathered. If things went as planned, he would be free, and all accusations would be dropped. "How did you manage to get this?" Carice's asked. "That is of no importance. Be ready to play your role when the time comes," Gustav stated before standing to his feet. "Time to look." Just as he was about saying again, Verb Herrera, a strange and powerful pressure suddenly descended upon the entire city. Chapter 747. Verb Herrera, a strange and powerful pressure suddenly descended upon the entire city. "What is that?" Carice's voiced out with a wary tone. The entire city could feel the sudden and enormous invisible pressure in the atmosphere. This made everyone pause their actions and look up in confusion. Gustav's eyebrows creased as he turned suspicious after this pressure descended. He could feel a certain kind of familiarity within this pressure. Gustav proceeded to wear a hoodie around his head and moved out of the lab. "Big brother Gustav, where are you going?" Carice's asked with a worried expression. "Stay here," Gustav commanded and leaped out through the window of Sir Zill's office. Sir Zill happened to just be coming in when Gustav leapt through the window. "Gustav!" he called out, but Gustav was already gone. It turned out he had information to pass to Gustav. Gustav landed in the middle of the street right beside Grayscale Pharmaceuticals and activated Sprint. Sprint has been activated. He ran up the side of a 200-story skyscraper and arrived at the rooftop in a few seconds. The pressure descending upon the city kept increasing as different media outlets in the city were broadcasting a particular news that concerned the MBO. At this point, people began to be affected and started moving indoors to decrease the effect of the pressure coming from above. Gustav looked up into the sky and could see a faint fluorescent light in the middle of the burning star-shaped pearl high above the city. The burning star-shaped pearl was always dazzling with yellow flames, but the small hint of fluorescent light could be seen in the middle this time. It was barely noticeable, but due to Gustav's eyesight he could spot it. Just as he wanted to activate God Eyes. Through a pillar of fluorescent-colored light suddenly shot down from above, landing right in the middle of the city. The moment it made contact with the ground, the light spread from the point of impact towards every corner of the city in a matter of seconds. The ground was glowing with a fluorescent light at this point in every part of the city. Later on, the pillar of light in the middle slowly dimmed. Everyone was startled at this, and they began to feel the pressure slowly disappear. However, Arg! Gustav groaned in pain as he felt a sharp pain on his forehead. This energy. It's the same as life tracking, he said internally as he held his forehead. Gustav! The MBO forwarded their plans. The system suddenly voiced in his head. Forwarded their plans? As Gustav voiced this out, his eyes widened as he came to a realization. Currently, his forehead was glowing with a /_, hashtag, _/, sign which was quite visible. They had the capacity to use life sign tracking too? Gustav was astonished as he voiced out after understanding what this was. You have to move in. Just as the system was speaking. Zuzum zuzum zuzum, bright lights suddenly concentrated on Gustav's position from different directions, and multiple people dressed in MBO uniforms began to appear on the rooftops of the buildings surrounding the one Gustav was currently standing on. Before Gustav knew what was happening, he was surrounded by multiple MBO officers. Gustav Crimson! Come with us quietly for questioning, one of them voiced out with a loud tone. Gustav looked around with a strong and piercing gaze. There's 17 of them. More will probably arrive soon too. Gustav was instantly able to calculate their numbers. The entire area radiated with the combined pressure from all of these MBO officers, all channeling their bloodlines at the same time. They were ready to attack Gustav the moment he acted in an unsatisfactory manner. This was a situation Gustav never saw coming once again, but he would be damned if he let himself get caught when he was almost done implementing his plans. All right. I'll come with you guys, Gustav voiced out while raising both hands. This caused some of them to crease their eyebrows in suspicion, seeing the way he just agreed. After I proved my innocence. The moment Gustav voiced this out. Combination has been activated, sprint plus dash, he turned to the side and charged southwest. Tuvish Gustav blasted across the place with immense speed, but a kind of barrier suddenly appeared the moment he tried to pass through the midst of the two MBO officers on the building he leapt towards. Bang! Gustav slammed into it and got blasted backwards. Ting! Ting! Zwihii walls of white suddenly began to connect from one MBO officer to the next, and in a matter of moments, a barrier had been fully constructed around Gustav. Gustav fell towards the window of the building behind and did a flip in midair before landing sideways on the window and leaping downwards towards the street below. There are civilians in the vicinity. Make sure you're careful with the usage of your abilities. One of the MBO officers shouted out as the MBO officers all moved towards the ledge of the building and began to jump down after Gustav. Bam! The instant Gustav landed on the ground, he wasted no time in charging forward again towards the left side of the building he had just fallen from. Conjuring an atomic blade, he raised his hand diagonally and slashed down at the whitish barrier that had been erected around the vicinity. Thwii, the instant contact was made, a small line appeared on the barrier, which depicted how sturdy it was. Gustav calculated in his mind how many times he would need to strike with that amount of force to break through it, and realized that it was a lot. There's no time. The instant this thought appeared in Gustav's head, he jumped towards the side. Bam! A massive boulder-sized black drilling object slammed into the barrier beside him as well as a yellow beam. Gustav began running around the sides and swerving as multiple attacks began to head towards him from different directions. Come quietly with us, Gustav Crimson! One of them shouted out as he saw Gustav's figure from above, leaving after images across the place. Chapter 748. He sent out a landslide across the entire street since it was empty except for the MBO officers chasing after Gustav. As Gustav felt the vibrations, he leaped forward and blasted through the 52nd floor on the building by the left. Kyr! Screams rang out as Gustav's actions startled the people on that floor. However, Gustav didn't mind and kept charging forward through the walls like they were paper thin. Tuhush, the MBO officer who had used the landslide attack, gritted his teeth as he stood several feet above the ground on an exalted pillar extending from the ground. He pointed his hand at the building Gustav leapt through and was about to use an attack when an MBO officer with a square-shaped red face held his shoulder from behind. Don't! The life of the civilians takes priority. If anyone is harmed during this operation, it will be another stain on the MBO's name," he voiced out before a rocket-like ignition blasted out of his back and legs. Fume, he flew forward and infiltrated the building through the same hole Gustav created after leaping into it. The MBO officer gritted his teeth even more as he stared at the other MBO officers in the vicinity going after Gustav too. Some of them had already gone up ahead through the same hole to continue chase before he tried implementing his attack. "A mere cadet is causing us so much trouble?" He was pissed that they couldn't unleash their abilities to the fullest due to the civilians in the surroundings. Originally, they would only care about their goal, which was getting Gustav, but now they had to be concerned about people because of the situation of things. The pillars shooting out of the ground began moving forward with speed, carrying him along with it. He passed the side of the building, deciding to chase from the side. Gustav's figure blasted through the back of the third building up ahead. That's an irregular speed for a cadet. This was everyone's thoughts as they saw how far Gustav had gone already. They had been briefed before that Gustav was one of a kind. Still, they were not expecting his speed to be way faster than everyone here, especially when they were all higher than him in terms of bloodline rank. "He's fast but not out of my range," the MBO officer, who was being carried forward by the pillar extending from the ground, thought as he stretched his hand out. Currently, Gustav was in midair, leaping towards the next skyscraper up ahead that was up 2,000 feet away with a wide road in between. KRRRYHHHCCH. KRRRYYCHHH. The ground below suddenly cracked open and multiple spikes shot out from it. Gustav could see the spikes coming at him from every direction below, and a red-faced MBO officer who just happened to be flying towards him from behind. Slash has been activated. Gustav increased the force of his arm swings as he conjured 2 atomic blades in his hand and spun repeatedly. Swish! 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 It looked like white lines were swimming around in midair as he cut down every one of these spikes protruding out of the ground. The entire place was covered up in dust as some of these spikes were obliterated from a single slash. At this point, the red-faced officer flying from behind had caught up to Gustav as he was falling from the air. He reached out as he kept flying forward, calculating Gustav's fall speed and knowing that he only needed to keep flying forward to catch Gustav, regardless of whether they were on the same height in the air or not. As he kept flying forward with speed. Hover has been activated. Gustav's body suddenly floated in midair just before he made his descent, reaching the same height as the officer flying towards him from behind. Why, the officer's eyes widened as he slowly flew past Gustav from below, not expecting that Gustav would suddenly float in midair. He thought this was the end of it, but he was sorely mistaken as he felt feet on his back. Gustav had landed on the officer's back and crouched a little before leaping upwards with force. Super jump has been activated. Boom! A loud sound reverberated across the air as the officer was blasted downwards from the force of the jump, while Gustav's body ascended across the air with speed. The entire force chasing from behind was stunned speechless, seeing a fairly high-ranking MBO officer get tossed towards the ground from a jump. Bang! He slammed into the streets below, leaving cracks all over the place while Gustav's figure could be seen flying over the skyscraper. They kept chasing regardless since they knew Gustav would arrive at a dead end behind this skyscraper due to the fact that the whitish barrier ended somewhere around there. Multiple attacks were still being sent towards Gustav, but the officers had to be watchful of the amount of power they used around here, and they weren't as quick as Gustav, so it made things a whole lot more difficult. On the bright side, there were 17 of them present, each with different bloodline abilities, and even more MBO officers would be here any moment, so they felt no matter how much Gustav tried to escape, he would be caught soon. In a few moments, over 10 of them had managed to get beyond the building. Gustav leaped over, and just as they thought, the dead end was right there. They could see Gustav up ahead with his back placed against the barrier since he had nowhere to go. They surrounded him but paid no heed to the fact that his right hand was on his left wrist. "Are you ready to surrender yourself now, Gustav Crimson?" One of them shouted out as bluish wings protruded out the sides of his right hand, which was pointed at Gustav. Gustav kept inspecting the MBO figures as they moved closer and closer. Chapter 749. Gustav kept staring at them as they moved closer and closer. The others arrived, and the circle became tighter as they moved closer to Gustav. Gustav looked around one final time and stomped on the ground with his left feet as his body bloated and turned green. Thrilk! 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 Icicle-like rocks instantly began protruding out of the ground, surrounding all 18 of them. In a moment, they had all been trapped along with Gustav within the encirclement of Iroh's silk Gustav had just conjured up. What is this? What are you doing? Stay right there and don't make another move! They shouted out one after the other after finding themselves trapped in this space with Gustav. Just one more movement, Gustav voiced out before tapping on his left wrist. What is? Just as the officer who controlled the ground earlier was about to voice out, a bright light surrounded Gustav. No! He shouted out as he controlled the pieces of the ground to surround Gustav in a bid to trap him. At the same time, the other officers also sent out different attacks towards Gustav. But before any one of them could make contact, Gustav disappeared from the spot. The MBO officers had looks of astonishment after this happened. Destroy the entrapment! One of them shouted out, and everyone began attacking the icicle-like rocks that had surrounded them. The Iroh silk was immensely sturdy and strong, but in the face of so many bombardments from multiple powerful MBO officers, it would definitely crumble in a matter of seconds. However, Gustav wasn't hoping to trap them there too long anyway, so this was all within his plans. Gustav reappeared on the other side of the barrier where he had initially attacked, which was quite a distance from where he had trapped the MBO officers. It turned out he had marked this place as a spatial checkpoint the previous time he attacked the barrier. This will cost a lot of energy. But I have no other choice right now, Gustav thought as he stretched out his right hand. The hilt of an atomic blade appeared within his hand and began growing in size. In the next moment, it was thrice as long as an average height human. Gustav swung it forward with intensity and speed. A long line was cut on the whitish-colored barrier, but in the next instant, it began to heal back. Atomic disintegration causes everything to get disintegrated from a molecular structure. The bigger atomic blade is, the faster it can disintegrate atoms. Even though the atom can regenerate, it just has to be able to disintegrate them at a faster rate. As Gustav analyzed, he turned around and sped backward as the atomic blade increased more in size. 100 EP, 100 EP, 120 EP, 150 EP, the more it increased in size, the higher the energy points consumed. Gustav turned around after leaving a bit of distance between himself and the barrier up ahead. He stretched the massive, milky, glowing-colored blade forward and activated combination once more. Sprint plus dash, dual-wish lines of cracks were left across the place as Gustav's body blasted forward with immense speed, arriving in front of the barrier in an instant. Bang! A loud sound of collision rang out as he stabbed the atomic blade into the barrier. The shockwaves spread out from the point of impact, slamming into the buildings on the sides and causing the sound of glass shattering to ring out as well. Gustav groaned as he kept pushing the atomic blade with as much strength as he could muster. His arms bulged intensely and became larger as he pushed forward, causing cracks to extend from the point where he was standing on the road to other parts of the surroundings. KRRRYYCHYYYKRRRYYCCHHH sparks began to appear around the areas where the tip of the milky-colored blade was piercing through. The atoms that made up the barrier were being disintegrated so fast the blade was beginning to make its way through. On the other side of the barrier. Boom! An explosion rang out as the multiple Iroh silk covering the environment was finally shattered after a few seconds of relentless attacks from within. Debris and smoke covered the entire vicinity, decreasing visibility immensely, but this didn't stop the MBO officers within as they charged out of it. Zwiwi swoosh fly, multiple figures blasted out from the smoke with speed and began moving towards the other end of the barrier. At this point, Gustav finally pushed the entire atomic blade through. Swoosh, his body phased through the hole that was created instantly, along with his massive atomic blade. Finding himself on the other end of the barrier, the atomic blade in his hand disintegrated into light particles as he charged forward with immense speed. Swoosh's cracks appeared all over the road as his figure instantly disappeared from the spot. Reddish scales grew out of Gustav's legs as his thighs and calves increased in size, furthering his speed even more. Combination was still activated, so he was currently moving at speed faster than sound, and now it had increased even more. At the time the MBO officers arrived at the position where Gustav had escaped from, the hole created had already sealed itself. "He got out," one of them shouted the instant they saw the cracks all over the place. How did he get out? This question was circulating in the minds of everyone at the moment, but now wasn't the time to make any analysis. The MBO officer with a reddish-colored face tapped a controller on his right wrist, causing the barrier to fade away. "After him!" he commanded before flying forward with immense speed. Boom! The fiery ignition on his back turned blue and made a booming sound as he shot across the sky with an even faster speed than before. The officer controlling the ground earlier landed in a street of the city and sunk into the ground. Rumbling sounds that suggested he was moving underground could be heard. Some MBO officers leaped from building to building while using gadgets to enable flight for them and chase after Gustav. Chapter 750. Other MBO officers were arriving on the scene with vehicles, and the entire area had become even more crowded than before. Those who arrived later asked about the current situation from their colleagues as they also gave pursuit with the understanding that they were currently going after Gustav. At this point, Gustav was closing in on the border of Burning Sands City to the south. Swoosh, he didn't stop running for a moment. Super Jump has been activated. Once he arrived at the border area, he leaped upwards with intensity. Boom! A massive tremor affected the surroundings, spreading out from where Gustav had leaped upwards. This! His figure cut across the sky with intense speed, looking like a red streak. The burning sands were right below him as his body flew several 10,000 feet across the air. Would be nice to have the ability of flight. Gustav could not stop thinking about this as his body soared through the sky. But he remembered that the only time he could fly was when he used the ultimate combination form, or when decimation was activated. When these were activated, flying seemed so natural to him, and it was also in difficult situations, so he didn't think much of it, nor could he enjoy the feeling that came with flying. Hover only allowed him to float in midair for a few seconds, so it couldn't be considered flying, and the only mixed breed he could transform into that could fly had lower movement speed compared to when he was running at full speed, so he couldn't even consider that at the moment. Gustav could already feel his speed in midair decreasing, which meant the momentum was slowly starting to die out, and he would be falling towards the burning sands soon. He was still very high up in the air, but he could feel the intense temperature from below. It was unlike anything Gustav had ever felt, like he was being cooled down and cooked at the same time. As his body began to reach the farthest point it could in the sky, he started descending. This should be far enough, Gustav thought as he began to click on the dimensional bracelet on his left wrist. He repeatedly swiped as different checkpoints were displayed until he finally saw the one he was looking for. He clicked on it instantly as he fell across the air. Zwyan, 50 feet away from making contact with the burning sands, a bright light surrounded his figure, and he disappeared. Zing, the officers who were chasing from behind had also arrived at the border, and they had several surveillance gadgets pinpointing the direction Gustav moved in. At this point, they realized he had crossed over the burning sands. Those who had the flight ability, or staying off the ground, continued to scale through after him. In contrast, those who were already making use of an aircraft had no issues with continuing the chase. But all of a sudden, Gustav disappeared from the radar. He disappeared! They were once more startled by this act. This was due to the fact that a spatial disruptor had been put in place, which meant no act of teleportation should work around a radius of 500 miles. Spread out and find him. He would still have to be somewhere around. All the MBO officers could hear the voice of a well-renowned commander through their comms. The number of MBO officers chasing after Gustav at this point had reached a number of 39. They spread out across the place, using one means of flight or the other as they traveled across the burning sands. Each MBO officer was Echo ranked, with a few of them already at Kilo rank, so they felt humiliated having to put in this much effort to locate a mere Falcon ranked mixed blood. The ones who had arrived earlier felt even more humiliated, recalling that Gustav even managed to trap them for a few seconds and escape the barrier they set up. They vehemently searched for Gustav everywhere above the burning sands for Gustav, making use of both technological gadgets and even their bloodline abilities. An MBO officer who could scan an entire area with his mind kept giving reports as he moved across the place, saying he couldn't find any signs of life around here. Others with unique scouting bloodlines also failed to find Gustav no matter how much they searched. Over 6 hours later, most of the MBO officers included in the search had returned back to the base to give their reports. Within a large hall where a multiple number of MBO officers gathered, a dissatisfied-looking officer with a face similar to that of a gigantic praying mantis could be seen yelling out with a loud tone. "A Falcon-ranked mixed blood managed to outrun every single one of you. Toy!" He spat out to the side. "You shameless pricks are soiling the reputation of the MBO. How did he manage to escape your hands when the higher-ups even gave the go-ahead to use life signs tracking to find him?" He kept voicing out his questions with a strong tone of disappointment. "Commander Lindstrand, we were not given enough information on the abilities of Gustav Crimson. If we had accessed him properly, we would have been able to deal with the situation better," one of the officers in the vicinity voiced out. "We even set up a spatial disruptor, but he was still able to use spatial ability to vanish. We weren't expecting that, and the variety of abilities left us with surprises, not knowing what to expect," another officer voiced out, and the others in the vicinity nodded their heads in agreement. "Our first encounter with him was also within a civilized area. We had to be careful with the use of our abilities, so we wouldn't harm innocent civilians. These factors gave Gustav Crimson the opportunity to escape from our clutches," another officer voiced out. Chapter 751. Our first encounter with him was also within a civilized area. We had to be careful with using our abilities, so we wouldn't harm innocent civilians. These factors gave Gustav Crimson the opportunity to escape from our clutches," another officer voiced out. "Excuses, excuses, excuses. Regardless of all of these, the MBO will be made a laughing stock for being unable to catch a Falcon ranked," Commander Lindstrand voiced out while shaking his head. "The life sign tracking tech was used on him, which means he should have been unable to think, talk, remember who he is, move or perform any action for the coming weeks. How was he able to negate the effects?" The second highest ranking officer in the hall voiced out with a suspicious look. He was the same red-skinned officer who Gustav tricked in midair during the pursuit. The entire place became silent as everyone pondered this same issue as well. Whenever the beam of light shot from the skies finally located the desired person, they would be unable to perform any action for weeks. They would literally be in a vegetative state, which might give them an untreatable side effect after they had snapped out of it. The burning feeling in their foreheads would be the last thing remembered when they returned to their senses. Some might even have their brains deteriorated, which was why the MBO only used the technology in extreme cases. In this case, the device surprisingly didn't cause such effects to Gustav, which was something no one could understand at the moment. That is, before Commander Lindstrand could voice out his sentence completely, a strong pressure suddenly descended upon the entire vicinity. GHRRHHHHH, the whole place vibrated intensely as they sensed a powerful figure floating above the premises. The officers' eyes widened as they looked upwards, even though they couldn't see through the roofing of the building they were currently in. "Who gave you the permission to use that device on my student?" A mighty feminine voice laced with anger and killing intent reverberated across the entire city. The citizens of the city were once again startled and shook with wariness, as they felt the pressure descending upon the city was even stronger than the one that happened hours ago. People began to run and hide for cover, thinking the same scenario with the beam of light shooting down from the sky earlier would repeat itself, but with more intensity since the pressure was more powerful. Isn't that the voice of the demon Qui? I mean young Miss Amy. One of the officers stuttered as he voiced out quickly. The others were not deaf, so of course, they were instantly able to tell who the voice belonged to as well. Every single person in the hall had expressions of fear on their faces, the two highest-ranking MBO officers included. Her student? Who is her student? All of them had this thought circulating in their minds as they seemed to be oblivious to who Miss Amy was talking about. Miss Amy, who was floating a few thousand feet above the ground, stared at the dazzling fiery star-shaped structure in the sky. Without saying a word, purplish energy blasted forth from her figure as she flew upwards while stretching out her right hand. Purplish streaks shot out of her palm and slammed into the structure, causing it to get blasted further into the sky as the flames surrounding it instantly died out. Miss Amy flew further upwards and grabbed the massive structure that seemed to be the size of 3 mountains merged together. She held it up in the air like it was nothing above the city and stared at the area where the MBO base was located. Fly high, she flung the massive structure downwards with ease. The officers within the base could feel the immense pressure headed towards them from above and instantly rushed out of the base, as quickly as they could. Boom! In the next moment, a mighty explosion rang out as the massive structure landed directly on the base and exploded, destroying the entire base along with the surroundings. The structure was looking way bigger than that in the sky initially due to the dazzling yellow flame surrounding it, making it look like an artificial sun. Now that it was put out, the size had reduced a lot, but it was still supermassive. The entire city suddenly descended into darkness after Miss Amy destroyed the fiery structure. It turned out that it was currently late in the night, but due to the structure that was always lit up, it still looked like daytime. Just like that, the citizens of Burning Sands City that had not experienced night in over 50 years finally saw the skies darken. Those who had managed to escape safely from the base without any harm stared at the purplish figure floating above in the night sky, radiating with menacing and powerful energy. Her gaze upon the area was like that of a deity staring at foolish mortals who had crossed her. Cold and merciless. She just destroyed the city's multi-tech device. Everyone was both astonished and fearful, knowing just how hot the structure was. None of them would be able to withstand the temperature. Talk more of touching it with their bare hands and putting out the flames surrounding it. You lots haven't answered my question? I said, who gave you permission to use the device on my student? Miss Amy's voice reverberated across the place again as she gracefully stretched her palm towards the already decimated base. Everyone's eyes widened in fear and wariness as they heard the question. They knew that if she was to attack again, not just the area surrounding the base but the entire city could be in trouble. Young miss, who is this student you speak of? One of the high-ranking officers asked with a respectful look from below. Gustav Crimson. The instant those words were voiced out, the entire place descended into a brief silence. We were not told that she had a student. And it just happened to be Gustav Crimson. A lot of them had these thoughts circulating in their minds. Chapter 752. Only a few people in the MBO knew that Gustav was affiliated with Miss Amy, and none of the ones who were sent to Burning Sands City were amongst them. Young miss, you have to understand. We were under orders from the higher-ups. Command Lindstrand voiced out with a respectful tone far different from how he had been speaking to the other officers a while ago. Those who had never seen Miss Amy before but had heard of her name were astonished, seeing that she was more fearful in person. The higher-ups told you fools to use it against my student, and you agreed to do so. Miss Amy voiced out with a condescending tone as the purplish energy around her blasted out of her body even more. Grrrrhhhhh, the entire place trembled immensely. You all deserve to die. Miss Amy didn't care if she sounded unreasonable at the moment. She raised her hand high up. Verthithii, in the next instant, a massive boulder appeared above the sky. Huh! Before anyone could react, the boulder began to increase in size. Says high rumbling sounds rang out across the city as the moon was blotted out by the massive rock that had appeared in the sky. In a few seconds, the entire city had been completely covered up by the massive piece of rock floating in the sky. Purplish energy surrounded the entire rock. They couldn't see Miss Amy's small figure holding onto this massive piece of rock with just a single hand since they were currently on the far northern side of the city. It only takes one action to flatten this entire city. Choose your next words carefully, Miss Amy voiced out while still floating high up in the air. Young miss, please be reasonable. It's not the fault of anyone here, we were just following orders. The commander shouted out once again with a panicked expression. Every single person in the city was panicking at this moment, seeing the massive rock stationed right above their city. The MBO officers knew they would be unable to do anything to stop her if she wanted to do this, so they just remained in place. A lot of them were cowering in fear and about to pass out from the pressure of her mixed blood energy. I do not care about your orders. Where is he? She questioned. He? Who? Commander Lindstrand asked. Gustav. Where did you keep him? Miss Amy questioned again. Oh, we lost him, young miss. We were unable to catch him. Commander Lindstrand answered quickly. Lost? So you lots didn't get him? She asked once again. No, young miss. He escaped. Commander Lindstrand praying mantis face lit up as he noticed the look on Miss Amy's face slowly changing. He had never been so glad about a failed mission before. Now he realized he should have been thanking his subordinates for failing to catch Gustav instead of scolding them. Are you telling me he's okay? Miss Amy asked once again with a tone of concern. The officers were unable to catch him due to his escaping tricks and multiple skills, so I'm sure he is fine, young miss, since he escaped with his own strength. Commander Lindstrand wasn't just praising Gustav's skills because he was Miss Amy's student but because he also saw some of the footages linking to Gustav's escape. He knew Gustav was truly a special mixed blood even though he scolded his subordinates for being unable to catch him. Now he felt it made sense why someone with a lower-ranked bloodline was skilled enough to escape the pursuit of many higher-ranked mixed bloods. The massive piece of rock in the sky slowly began to shrink down after Miss Amy heard the response. Her gaze slightly reduced in intensity as the purplish energy surrounding her slowly started to rescind. Lil sis, were you truly going to destroy the entire city? Another feminine voice was heard in the air as a figure appeared behind Miss Amy. If they had harmed him, I would raze this city to the ground. Miss Amy answered unhesitatingly without mincing words. Chills ran down everyone's spine as they heard that. She's not called the Demon Queen for nothing, all of them bore thoughts similar to this. You're so violent, lil sis, haha. You still haven't changed. The other feminine voice resounded again. Why did you follow me? Miss Amy asked as she slowly descended from the sky. The figure descending with her was a beautiful lady with gray and blue-colored hair. This lady had a slim figure and was clad in a red leather gown with a long slit reaching her left thigh. This was the same lady that teleported the rest of the civilians out of the city Miss Amy saved from the ashy poisonous fog. Oh, come on, I had to see who was making my little sis get all worked up, Brilia said with a light chuckle. Turns out it was a little fugitive, she added with a light snarky tone. Don't get in my way. Miss Amy turned to the side and gave her a death glare while speaking. Of course not. I want, Brilia responded with a nervous chuckle while raising her hands slightly with a look of defeat. Miss Amy turned to look around and stared at the destruction she had caused. Seeing everywhere in flames, not one shred of pity could be seen in her gaze. The MBO officers were glad that the danger had passed, but they were still very scared at the moment seeing her walking towards them. Now they didn't know whether to keep going after Gustav or not when the higher-ups gave the instruction. On one side, they might lose their official title, and on the other side, they might lose their lives. Come here, you, Miss Amy voiced out. The praying mantis-faced commander walked towards her trying to maintain a calm outlook. Tell me everything that happened, she demanded while a chair formed behind. Miss Amy proceeded to sit on the chair amidst the flames and destruction, while crossing her legs as she listened to the narration of Commander Lindstrand. Chapter 753. Within an unknown place in the universe, time and space flowed as normally as they would. This part of the deep vacuum of intergalactic space was devoid of any form of light. However, visibility wasn't zero. If one looked closely, one could see a small brown dot very far in the endless vacuum of space. The brown dot was actually a planet, albeit too far from the current position, so it looked tinier than a human baby's pinky. Orange-colored solar winds occasionally moved across this dark part of space, which seemed more dead than normal. The gravitational force in this area was also at an absolute, and a small shrieking sound was audible. VHHRRHHHH, an ashy-colored fog could be seen wriggling like a creature as it drifted across the endless intergalactic space. It seemed to be squirming in agony as it beelined towards the small brown dot in the distance. Suddenly, "Ho, what do we have here?" Numerous voices suddenly boomed across space. "Quite an interesting creature, I should scan its components." It sounded like numerous voices echoing together with a mix of screeches, male and female. Still, it was actually coming from a single source. Even though these numerous voices joined together could be heard, no figure could be seen. In fact, it seemed as if the voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The ashy fog, which obviously had sentience, wriggled across the place in space, trying to find the source of the voice, but to no avail. This part of space quietened for some time, almost leading the ashy fog to believe the source of the voice was gone, but in the next instant. Interesting. Interesting. This creature will benefit me. Ha ha! The voices sounded excited after staying silent for a while. This gave room to the thought that it had finished scanning the ashy-colored fog like it mentioned earlier. "You're coming with me, little creature!" The intertwined voices resounded out again, and in the next instant, ZHRIXXX, a small black hole opened up and swallowed up the entirety of the ashy-colored fog. It disappeared the next instant, and this part of the intergalactic space returned to its initial tranquility. Within an underground tunnelway that looked rugged and was packed with lots of chunks scattered around the place, a figure could be seen sitting a pile of debris while munching on some food. This was obviously Gustav, and he was currently in the same underground tunnelway he blew away during his escape with Boss Danzo and Carisas from the underground battle arena guards. The whole place looked stuffed, and the walls of the tunnelways looked like they might come crashing down at any moment. Fortunately, the holes created on the roofing from the blast had been patched, and even though there was barely any space for movement within this place, Gustav was glad it wasn't as bad as he pictured. The entire tunnelway almost completely collapsed the last time, but the Ring Lords had begun working on them after Gustav destroyed the pathways to getting to one of their underground battle facilities. Even though they were unable to restructure it completely before Gustav erased them from existence, they had repaired it to a certain extent, which was why Gustav could stay here without problems. This was where he had picked to teleport to while he was falling towards the burning sands when the MBO officers were chasing after him. It was over 1,000 feet below the surface of the burning sands. This was made possible since Gustav had teleported away from here using his dimensional bracelet the last time he fought Garu and Biden. The dimensional bracelet marked spots he had teleported from as checkpoints to teleport back to such locations anytime. Gustav consumed the last bar wrap of snack in his hand and tapped on his left wrist. "It's back to being fully charged," he muttered as he recalled he had only been here for about 12 hours. 4 solid-looking blue bars were displayed on the surface of the bracelet. Gustav had used the bracelet twice to teleport, and he recalled only half a bar was deducted. Originally, it took extremely long for the bracelet to recharge, which was why Gustav refrained from using it unnecessarily. The reason Gustav didn't teleport far away both times was that he had studied the dimensional bracelet, so he knew a lot more power was consumed when he teleported farther distances or with multiple people. Gustav knew if he decided to teleport to the other places saved as checkpoints which were very far away, the entire 4 bars might be consumed, and using the dimensional bracelet for a long time would be out of the question. He didn't want to be far away from Burning Sands City despite the situation since he hadn't completed his objective yet, so this was the best course of action he could think of at the time. "Since no one has found me, That would mean the burning sands can defect the ability of the life signs tracking the MBO used. Gustav analyzed. He recalled the beam from the sky and his head burning up, so he knew the tracking was affiliated with the light. Since the MBO had used it earlier, he didn't have any doubt that they could use it again to try and find him. But since he had been here for half a day and no one had any idea about his whereabouts, it meant the burning sands above prevented the effectiveness of whatever device they were using to implement it. Gustav was actually right with his speculation. The MBO did try using life signs tracking again, but when the beam fell in the middle of the burning sands, there was no response, unlike before when it was in the middle of the city. This happened before Miss Amy's arrival, and the MBO was led to believe Gustav might have escaped to neighboring cities, so the word had already been sent out for the other cities to watch out for him. Chapter 754. Regardless of these actions, Gustav was still unable to be found, so he was glad he made the right decision by teleporting to this place. That was unexpected. Gustav was still surprised that the MBO had the capability to use something similar to life sign tracking. It wasn't exactly the same with his, but the similarities could not be overlooked. At the time it was activated, his forehead burned with a symbolic glow, and they were instantly able to pinpoint his location. The energy the beam emitted was also similar when he activated life sign tracking. His wouldn't cause the forehead of a person to glow up, but he would have to copy the invisible symbol ingrained deep in their forehead and picture it to find the person. Gustav's life signs tracking wouldn't cause any harm to the person he was looking for, either would the surroundings be affected. But the MBO's device seemed to lack that, and the fact that the person had to be in a city-wide range of the beam before it could be effective. Gustav could see through a person's forehead no matter where they were in the world so long as he had their life signs. He could also locate them from that. Safe to say, Gustav's life sign tracking was less complicated and more effective than the MBO's. He had no idea that the negative effect on the person it was used against was even worse than he thought, and he just happened to be unaffected. The MBO pushed their plans forward suddenly. I hacked into one of their mainframes and found out they had a meeting not too long ago. The system voiced in his head. A sudden meeting, I almost got caught because of that. Gustav couldn't understand why they would just change their minds like that. One of the people in attendance for that meeting was young Joe. The system added. Of course, it had to be him. Gustav wasn't so surprised anymore. Knowing young Joe for being a master of persuasion, Gustav knew he must have given the higher-ups reason to implement their plan early. It was already a given that the device using life sign tracking was the plan to get Gustav, but he couldn't understand why they didn't just make use of it earlier. Why did it seem like they were giving him time to show himself before they decided to use it like it was an extreme measure? Gustav couldn't wrap his head around this, but he decided to keep it at the back of his mind in the meantime. That bastard! When I'm done handling this situation and getting the second quarter of Scientist Still research, I should find a way to erase his pitiful existence. This had once again triggered Gustav. He knew young Joe was still after him, and now everything else that had been happening, which increased the world's suspicions about Gustav, made sense now. Gustav felt young Joe was probably pulling strings in the shadows to make sure this incident completely buried him. He hadn't forgotten about young Joe and everything he had done, but there was no time to deal with young Joe while dealing with everything he had been dealing with since he got out of camp. Gustav sighed, trying to relax. His current plans were much more important at the moment. I need to get to the business district I destroyed. It's probably still very much under surveillance, which means they'll have to be careful. Gustav voiced out. But you need to get the corpse from Scientist Still's lab first, the system reminded. That goes without a saying, but the business district is harder to get into without arousing any suspicions and implementing my plans. Gustav responded. On the bright side, they think you escaped to another city, so they'd probably not try to use that device anytime soon, the system stated. But they know I can teleport, so they should also know I might come back. It's not so certain that they wouldn't make use of the device. Gustav was still a bit worried about what needed to be done. Anyway, he would have to get back to Burning Sands City soon. They had no idea that the city had been plunged into darkness due to Miss Amy destroying the structure responsible for shooting out the life sign tracking beam. They're probably still everywhere trying to get me. They'll stay here for a day more. Gustav looked around as he spoke. Burning Sands City. What happened here? A youngster in a white MBO outfit voiced out as he got out of an aircraft that had just landed with a group of other youngsters coming out behind him. Looks like hell rained down on this place. Another youngster answered him from behind as he also got out. The others behind had looks of awe as they stared at the mountain-sized star-shaped structure sitting in the middle of a gigantic crater that seemed to have been created from a collision. They were a group of 12 currently standing in place, staring at the destruction in the surroundings with looks of confusion and astonishment. It seemed like this wasn't what they were expecting to meet here. Hey, Ildris, what do you think that is? One of them with dark skin and bush afro-styled hair voiced out. I'm not so sure, but from the looks of things. The tallest in the group voiced out as he looked up into the dark sky to see the moon positioned at the northeast. I think that used to be Burning Sands City artificial sun, he stated with a look of uncertainty. Everyone was startled as they heard that. They stared at the massive structure once more, then looked at the sky as they recalled a piece of information. Their artificial sun? Falco voiced out with a tone of disbelief. Did you forget it was mentioned that Burning Sands City never experienced nightfall? Timmy voiced out from the side. Yeah. Oh. Falco came to a realization as he looked upwards. It's night. Chapter 755. Yeah. Oh. Falco came to a realization as he looked upwards. It's night, he voiced out. Everyone else had looks of contemplation on their faces as they wondered how this came to be. The group of 12 that had just arrived comprised of Ildris, Falco, Ria, Glade, Angie, Timmy, Elevera, Chad, Vera, and 2 other special class cadets. These 5 had been put on a special mission different from the other cadets who were undergoing their first mission after the 1 year spent within the MBO camp. The MBO camp, a few days earlier, within a small private space, a group of 12 were gathered together in front of an MBO officer dressed in an orange-colored MBO uniform. He seemed to be briefing them about something which was quite shocking, based on the expressions on their faces. They all had expressions of confusion and disbelief on their faces. What? Our first mission is to assist the MBO in finding Gustav? Falco voiced out after the officer in front of them finished speaking. Yes, you're to put an effort into assisting them in tracking him. You have all been chosen to catch the fugitive Gustav based on your past relationship with him. We expect good results from you lots. The MBO officer voiced out unhesitatingly. Hold up. Fugitive? There must be a mistake somewhere. He voiced out with a tone of disapproval. Did you miss the part where I mentioned almost 3,000 people were killed and properties worth hundreds of millions were destroyed as well? The MBO officer responded with a condescending tone. Are you saying he's responsible? Ildris proceeded to ask. So far, all the evidence points towards him, so he's the main suspect. The MBO officer answered. Which means there's still a chance of this all being some huge mistake. Ildris mumbled. There has to be some sort of mistake. Gustav wouldn't just do that. Angie finally spoke after being silent for some time. I mean, he would kill, but he wouldn't kill for no good reason. Committing manslaughter is out of option, Angie thought. Gustav always have a reason for killing. I'm sure the MBO are not digging well into this. Matilda also voiced out her displeasure about this whole situation. Killing over 2,700 people, old, young, and children included. Yeah, I'm sure he had a good reason for doing that. The MBO officer voiced out while staring at the cadets like they were naive. There's no way he's responsible for that. He replied with a look of certainty. Well, if that is so, he should come out and prove himself innocent. Since you're his friends, help catch him, and then you can help him prove his innocence, the MBO officer stated. The details you all need about the whole situation are in the chips I handed you. Make sure you go through the information and learn about the situation completely. You all will be transported to Burning Sands City in 2 days," he voiced out, and proceeded to start walking towards the door. "I almost forgot." The MBO officer paused as he arrived at the exit and turned his head to the side. "The world government placed a bounty of 40 million on his head. That amount of money could change your lives if you catch him yourselves," he voiced out before leaving. "This," Glade voiced out with a look of astonishment. 40 million? Chad voiced out with a tone of disbelief. "He's just a suspect, and they already put this much bounty on him?" Matilda couldn't believe her ears. Bounties would only be put on confirmed criminals who had already caused countless deaths and destruction. Sahil's boss, Sharmax, was someone who was already considered a crime lord, so he had up to 100 million bounty on his head. It was surprising that they would put a bounty like this on Gustav's head when it hadn't even been confirmed yet if he was responsible. "As expected of that merciless bastard. Ha ha, I will catch him and get the money for myself," Chad voiced out with a crazy look on his face. He stopped laughing when he sensed the stares on him in the room. Eldris, Angie, and the others were staring at him intensely with a serious look as if to warn him. "What? He's wanted. Y'all are in the wrong place if you're showing sentimentality on the job," Chad voiced out with a frown before turning around to leave as well. "I don't know Gustav as much as the rest of you, but I'm sure there's more to this than revealed." Elevra finally spoke after silently accessing the situation in her mind. "Let's make sure we find him first before they do so we can hear from him directly," Elevra suggested. "Sounds like a plan." He responded with a nod. There was no way he would accept handing Gustav over just like that, no matter what the MBO said. "They probably want us to fish him out in a kind of way, or they need private information about him that they could use to catch him from us. Either way, I don't think they'll let us get directly involved," Ildris stated with a thoughtful gaze. "The MBO better be ready to kiss my black ass if they think he'll give them any information on Gustav," he stated with a decisive glare. "What if they decide to kiss it, though?" Falco voiced out in response. Everyone turned to stare at him, and he with a myriad of expressions displayed on their face. "Sorry, that was a weird thing to ask." The moment Falco stated, the boys burst into laughter. "Idiot, dumbass, oh, come on, it was a genuine question, who says that?" "Ha ha." The girls stared at them with straight faces, and Glade sighed while face-palming. "This is a serious situation, guys," she voiced out. "Ahem, yes, cough cough, back to the topic at hand." Ildris tried regaining his cool composure as he voiced out. Chapter 756. "I don't care about you lot's plan. I'll catch Gustav and hand him over myself if I have to. I want that money," another special class cadet that happened to be in this group voiced out. He gave everyone a glare before leaving through the exit. He was the only guy that didn't share in their sense of humor, and now they were only 10 left in the room. "Who cares about those 2 idiots? I will not let anything happen to my rival," Rhea shouted out with a look of enthusiasm. "Keep your voice down, dumbass." Timmy slapped the back of his head as he voiced out. "Let's just make sure to give the MBO very little information and make plans to get to Gustav before anyone else does," Matilda said with a decisive look. "If you're on this, hands in," Matilda said while stretching out her hand. Ildris nodded and stretched out his hand, placing it on hers. He wasted no time and moved to the side while stretching out his hand as well. Falco, Timmy, Rhea, Elevra, and Glade also moved forward and placed their hands on the others as well. "I don't know him well enough to, but like Elevra said, there's more to this, so I agree with the plan." Chutlu, the 6th-rank strongest first-year cadet, voiced out as he also moved forward. He placed his palm right on top of theirs as well. Angie's face showed a radiant smile as she turned to the side and stared at Vera, who was standing over there all this time without speaking. "What about you, Vera?" she asked. "It goes without a saying that I will help my master," she said with a serious look before walking towards them, and placed her hand on the 8 hands already joined together. Angie was a little startled hearing Vera call Gustav her master, but she shrugged it off and moved towards them to place her hands on theirs too. "Let's do it," she voiced out with a strong tone. While that was happening, all across different places in the camp, cadets were receiving their first missions in groups. It was already a year since they had arrived at camp, so it was time for the first years to embark on their first missions. First missions were usually easy ones and pretty much tests to see how much improvement every cadet had gone through in the last year. Depending on how well a cadet did during their first mission, they might be sent on another one and return later to camp than the others. If they were assessed to have performed spectacularly on the field, 1 year would be deducted from the amount of time they are supposed to spend in the camp. Originally it was 4 years, but those who performed splendidly would have the numbers reduced for them. For Gustav, it was already guaranteed he wouldn't spend more than 2 years before the first years began training a year ago. Right now, different groups all across camps had received their first mission, and they would be leaving the camp in about 2 to 3 days for their first mission. Eildris, Angie, and the others happened to be drafted on this special mission to assist in catching Gustav. Within the next 2 days, they studied the information on the chip and got more details about the incident. This made them realize the severity of the situation, seeing clips about the destruction and the state the city was left in after the incident. Only Angie was completely running crazy with a lot of thoughts in her head as she saw a piece of information that stated Boss Danzo was killed. She remembered Boss Danzo to be someone Gustav considered to be like a father to him, and it truly scared her to think of what Gustav could have done after this happened. Could he have gone mad and caused this destruction because of that? Angie thought as she sat in her room, analyzing the whole situation. No, Gustav would only try to harm the people responsible. There would be no reason for him to commit genocide. Angie held her head as she thought. She was extremely worried after seeing this piece of information. She barely knew Boss Danzo, but Gustav had mentioned him so many times that it was impossible to overlook their relationship. I should keep this from the others. They may see it as a reason to believe he's responsible, Angie thought to herself. I just hope he's okay. Thinking about it carefully, Angie realized there was no way Gustav would be okay, just like she wouldn't if she lost her father. We have to find him before anyone else does. Angie really longed to find Gustav and be beside him right now, but there was no way to achieve that. She suddenly recalled something. He mentioned a granddaughter here in camp. Has she been informed? Angie thought before standing to her feet. I should go speak with her, she decided. Burning Sands City, present time. You kids. 2 MBO officers approached the group of 12 standing in a lineup format a few feet ahead of the aircraft. They turned to face him after hearing that. Commander Lindström will see you now, follow me. The lady on the left voiced out and proceeded to turn around. Wait, what about her? Angie voiced out while gesturing at the aircraft behind. A feminine figure with a crestfallen expression walked out of the aircraft in the next instant. We were told there was only 12 of you. Who is she? The MBO officer asked. She's here for her father, Angie responded. Both officers stared at each other in confusion before the female officer responded. You 12 come with me. My subordinate will take care of her, she said before proceeding to turn around once more, leading them away from the aircraft. The other male officer walked towards the girl in a cadet outfit as well to question her. The group of 12 were led towards a massive tent-like structure right behind the area of destruction. Join my Discord server. I will post Miss Amy's illustration as a paragraph comment here. Chapter 757. The group of 12 was led towards a massive tent structure right behind the area of destruction. Many MBO officers were moving across the place, and each of them exuded power which made the group confused even more. If there are these many powerful officers in place, how is it possible for the artificial sun to get destroyed? They all had similar thoughts in their minds as they headed for the tent-like structure. They were led through the entrance in a few seconds, and it looked like they had arrived at what seemed to be an improvised base. It looked really better on the inside than they expected, with different sets of technology set up in different areas. A few officers could be seen stationed in front of holographic computers tapping on keyboards. Different screens floated in midair, displaying several locations all across the city. A few MBO officers were currently standing in the middle around two ladies as they seemed to be discussing something. The MBO officer who brought the group here moved towards the officers standing around the middle area discussing. "The cadets are here, sir," she voiced out the moment she arrived in front of them while gesturing towards the back. The 5 discussing turned to stare at the group of 12. "What are they doing here?" Miss Amy, who happened to be in the middle, voiced out as she spotted the kids. "Miss Amy?" Angie said with a surprised look. Falco, Glade, and Matilda also recognized Miss Amy, remembering she was Gustav's master, and also recalling the rumor that she was the most powerful female mixed blood on Earth. Besides them, a few of the other special class cadets also recognized Miss Amy's face, and their faces lit up with shock. Gustav is done for. Those who didn't know of her relationship with Gustav had this thought. "Angie and the rest of you, why are you here?" Miss Amy asked once again. The others were surprised Miss Amy actually knew who Angie was and started questioning the connection in their minds. Miss Amy." Before Angie could explain, Commander Lindstrand interrupted. "They are here on the higher-ups' order to assist with catching Gustav Crimson," he explained. "Oh?" Miss Amy voiced out while scanning at all 12 of them. They felt chills crawl down their spines as she stared at them one after the other. They couldn't help but feel like they were doing something wrong. Impossible. The legendary Demon Queen is also after Gustav. We might as well forfeit this mission. Chad was one of the few that knew who Miss Amy was. "You lots plan on extraction information about Gustav from them?" Miss Amy's eyes squinted as he turned to the side to ask Commander Lindstrand. "That is, young miss, the higher-ups sent them here. I have nothing to do with this." Commander Lindstrand praying mantis-like face trembled a bit as he spoke. "I can send them back if you want," he added with a respectful tone. Miss Amy had a contemplative look on her face as she heard that. "Miss Amy, you know he couldn't have done that, right? Please let us help find him," Angie suddenly shouted out with a pleading expression. "Of course. I know my student well enough. While it is within possibility, the circumstances surrounding what happened is what needs to be brought to the light," Miss Amy stated. "Student?" Chad blurted out with a look of confusion. The others, too, had heard this and wondered if they heard right. Miss Amy didn't bother responding to them and turned to face Commander Lindstrand. "Have you suspended the search on him?" she asked. "Yes, we have sent out the word for all officers around the city to return to base and cease their search," Commander Lindstrand answered. "Good. I will find him myself," she stated. "If anyone makes a move on him or harm him in any way, there will be hell to pay," Miss Amy voiced out before proceeding to walk away. The group of 12 left a gap in between their lineup for her to pass through as she moved towards the exit. "Is this it? Does that mean our mission ended before it even started?" The cadets were both astonished and confused at the same time after listening to Miss Amy's conversation with Commander Lindstrand. Miss Amy suddenly paused as she got to the entrance and turned slightly to the side. "Let these ones follow me. They'll complete their mission under me," she stated. "Young miss, do you mean you want them to work with you?" Commander Lindstrand asked, trying to confirm if his ears were playing tricks on him. "Hold on. I don't know some of them," she said while turning around and began walking forward again. Step. 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 With every step she took, their hearts pounded in anxiety. "Just these 5 are good," Miss Amy said while pointing at Angie, Falco, Matilda, and Glade. "Thanks, ma'am, haha," he voiced out, raising his fist. A smile appeared on Angie's face as she heard that, but Miss Amy's next statement left her dumbfounded. "Send the rest back. Let them go on some other mission. They're not needed here," Miss Amy voiced out and turned back around to leave. The others had dark looks on their faces after hearing that. Ildris smiled wryly while Elevra maintained her poker face, seemingly not bothered by this decision. Miss Amy turned to the side and stared at Elevra from the corner of her eye. You remind me of him, but I can't let you work with me if I don't trust you, Miss Amy said before resuming walking forward. Everyone saw Miss Amy's eyes on Elevra in those few moments, so they knew she was speaking to her, but this brought them even more confusion. Is Gustav her student? Is Gustav the person she is referring to when she says Elevra reminds her of him? Did she just get rid of every other MBO officer and us on the case so she could find Gustav herself? Different thoughts ran through their minds. Chapter 758. Miss Amy! Angie called out to her before she could leave once more. Ugh, what is it, kid? Miss Amy asked with a slight look of frustration. Some of them are Gustav's precious friends, and am sure they will be of help, Angie voiced out. Don't know them, don't care. Miss Amy responded with an uncaring expression. Gustav trusts some of them. And he would even entrust them with his life if need be, Angie stated. Miss Amy turned to stare at Angie at this point with a look of ridicule. If you think that, then you don't know Gustav. He would never entrust anyone with his life. I'm not even sure he would entrust me with his life. That kid sigh. Miss Amy spoke and sighed afterward. She proceeded to turn around to leave at this point. She's not wrong. Looks like Angie won't be able to convince her, he thought as he watched the dialogue from up ahead. I know he wouldn't, but I'm counting on the fact that one day he will. But I can assure you he really trusts some of them here. Angie remained unrelenting as she tried to convince Miss Amy. I don't. Miss Amy responded coldly before leaving through the exit. Angie sighed after Miss Amy left. She was quite disappointed that her words yielded no result. Angie turned around and started walking towards the group. I guess we'll leave it up to you guys, Ildris voiced out with a smile. There's nothing to worry about since she's like the strongest being on the planet. I'm sure we'll only be able to do little anyways, Timmy stated too. Rhea still seemed crestfallen since he was hoping he would get to see Gustav after so long. I can't believe the Demon Queen was his teacher this whole time. Chad was still having a hard time believing everything that had been revealed here, and so were the others who knew of Miss Amy. Looks like you seven are heading back, Tom. One of the officers beside Commander Lindström was speaking when a feminine voice interrupted. Hold on. Everyone turned towards the entry point to see Miss Amy walking back in. Point out the ones you said Gustav trusts, Miss Amy said while staring at Angie. A look of excitement appeared on Angie's face as she heard that. I will only pick them if their bloodlines will prove useful in some kind of way, Miss Amy added. Angie began pointing them out one after the other, starting with Ildris. He just like E. He is one of Gustav's best buddy and also ranked number 3 now number 2 since Gustav was deranked. Gustav trained her in camp, so she's like your grand student, she voiced out while pointing at Vera. Oh, Gustav decided to train someone. Miss Amy was a bit surprised, but this was an automatic pass from her because she knew Gustav wouldn't just pick anyone to perform such action. He calls himself Gustav's rival. After giving a breakdown of info on Ildris, Vera, Timmy, and Rhea, only Elevra was left. She's not really close with Gustav, but she's more of a rival considering the fact that she was number 1, then Gustav deranked her, then she became number 1 again after the whole incident, Angie said while gesturing at Elevra. Miss Amy walked towards Elevra and stared at her. Her eyes were especially focused on the purple head tie wrapped around her forehead. Miss Amy could sense a restricted force of power there. I'll be keeping my eyes on you, Miss Amy said to her. Yes, miss, Elevra responded respectfully, but unlike the others who had chills crawling down their spines whenever Miss Amy stared at them, Elevra had a straight face and didn't even flinch once. Miss Amy was quite interested in her than she admitted, but all that was something she decided to put aside for now. All right then, the other 2 can be sent on another mission, Miss Amy said before turning around to leave. You 10 come with me, Miss Amy said while walking out. Wait. What about me, Angie? Chad yelled out with a look of betrayal. Eh? You don't even like Gustav. Why would I pick you? Angie stared at Chad and questioned with a confused expression. That was before. Haha, aren't we all friends? Come on, pick me too, Chad voiced out shamelessly. No, Angie stated with a look of disgust before walking out with the rest. Chad and the other special class cadet had a bitter look on their faces as the 10 followed after Miss Amy. Within the underground tunnelway, Gustav sat in a cross-legged position with his eyes closed. It has completely changed to a dark red color now. What does this mean? Gustav muttered as his senses scanned his internal structure. He was currently checking on the state of his Yarki. It was still wrapped by the ashy-colored, band-aid-like restraints, but he could see the color of Yarki had completely changed within. The band-aid-like restraints covering it had little cracks all over. They were barely visible, but Gustav could sense them like he could see them directly. It will probably come off in a few days, Gustav thought out loud. He was interested in seeing what other surprise Yarki had in store for him beyond the color change. He was sure he would be in for some surprises, sensing that Yarki also emitted a different kind of energy compared to before. After a few more seconds, Gustav retracted his senses and stood to his feet. It's time, he voiced out after opening his eyes. I should contact scientists the moment I get back into the city, Gustav decided while tapping on the dimensional bracelet strapped to his left wrist. Tap. He wasted no time in picking the same area he was trapped in by the MBO during his pursuit. As the bracelet emitted a burst of bright light, his facial features were also changing. In the next instant, zing, he disappeared amidst the bright light. Chapter 759. As the bracelet emitted a burst of bright light, his facial features were also changing. In the next instant, zing, he disappeared amidst the bright light. Appearing back in the middle of the city, Gustav was met with a huge shock. Why are the skies dark? He mumbled while staring at the skies. The blazing star-shaped pearl that was always situated in the northern part of the sky within the city was nowhere to be found. Is this an after effect of using life sign tracking? Gustav wondered after seeing the empty skies. He already felt the MBO's life sign tracking method wasn't as efficient as his. So thinking this was an after effect was due to knowing that the beam came from the floating structure in the sky. Gustav activated God Eyes and looked around the city. There were also power outages in some areas. Thinking that this might be an after effect, Gustav felt they wouldn't be using the structure for a while, and he didn't have to worry about being located like before in the city for some time. He had no idea the entire structure had been destroyed, and life sign tracking would most likely be unable to be used in this city unless the MBO decided to activate one of their space satellites and point it in the direction of this city. This was something that would be unlikely to happen due to Miss Amy's recent input. Wearing his hoodie over his head, he leaped down from the rooftop of the skyscraper he was currently standing on and landed one street away from Grayscale Pharmaceuticals. He was glad he was away from Grayscale Pharmaceuticals when he sensed a strange pressure over the city 2 days ago. If he had remained there, the lab would have been raided by the MBOs since that was where they would track him to. Then he would be unable to come back there like he was doing right now. The MBO had tracked him to the top of a skyscraper in the middle of the city, not having any idea about where exactly he came out from since he was previously in any of the buildings in that particular area. Thank goodness you're okay. We were worried, Sir Zil voiced out as Gustav sat on one of the sofas in his office. Why? If I had been caught, it would have been broadcasted all over the media, Gustav replied as he transformed back into his original looks right in front of Sir Zil. Fascinating, Sir Zil said, internally unable to hide the look of astonishment on his face. He already knew Gustav had the ability to do this initially, but he had never seen Gustav do it in person. The MBO employed a variety of methods to catch you in the last 2 days and even activated the same light beam they used back then twice after you were said to have escaped towards the west area of the Burning Sands, Sir Zil explained. We all know how dangerous the Burning Sands are, so Carissa's and I were worried for your safety, Sir Zil added. He was glad when he finally heard Gustav's voice through a call some minutes ago. Nothing to worry about. I won't be so stupid as to put myself in unnecessary danger unless absolutely necessary, Gustav responded. Serzel nodded before speaking once more. On the bright side, they won't be able to use that technological device to locate you anymore. That's true. The city is dark at night now. It must be an after effect of using that power, Gustav stated. An after effect? No, that's far from being the reason, Serzel corrected. Huh? How do you mean? Gustav felt Serzil's response hinted that he knew something Gustav didn't. Something happened about 20 hours ago. Serzil went on to narrate how a powerful pressure descended upon the city, more powerful than the time the device was activated. In a few minutes, he had completely narrated the entire scenario of the structure being thrown down by a figure, and how rock covered the entire sky in the city. Why would that powerful figure destroy the artificial sun? Gustav asked with a look of astonishment. He was also quite surprised the MBO hadn't done anything about it, and even though the media displayed the happenings, the person responsible for the deed was not displayed. The only thing everyone heard was, "Who gave you the permission to use that device on my student?" The powerful figure seemed angry. Serzil also had no idea who exactly the person was, just like everyone in the city, so he just narrated to Gustav exactly as it had happened. Student? Gustav's eyes widened. Yes, Serzil confirmed. Was it the voice of a woman? Gustav proceeded to ask. Yes, it was a feminine voice, Serzil said with a tone of certainty. Miss Amy? It's gotta be her, Gustav instantly thought. Do you know her? Serzil noticed the strange expressions on Gustav's face and asked. I think that's my teacher, Gustav responded. Your teacher? You had a teacher as powerful as that? Serzil couldn't believe his ears. But I didn't want her to get involved. I still don't, Gustav said with a low sigh. Miss Amy is here, and she already caused problems as expected. Gustav didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this. It's obvious she was mad because they were after you. I did get some news that the MBO officers, who were sent outside the city to look for you, were retreating. Looks like she has a big influence in the MBO. You should use this to your advantage, Serzil voiced out. No, I don't want her to go against the entire MBO because of me. This is already enough, Gustav said with a tone of disapproval. While Miss Amy would be able to pull such a thing off, this would cause tension between her and the MBOs. The world powers would be wary instead of being comfortable with her presence on Earth. Chapter 760. Gustav still had no idea why Miss Amy had agreed to wear a seal and work with the MBO, so he didn't want to cause problems for her. But for all he knew, it could be for some important reason, and he didn't want things to be ruined for his sake, since the consequences could be something even Miss Amy might not be able to handle. Okay. But are you not going to try and see her? Serzil asked. Not at all. I have to make sure she doesn't know I'm here. Gustav had decided to remain hidden. So, back to the plan. You know what I need, Gustav said, getting them back on track as to why he was here. Follow me into the lab, Serzil said while standing up from his seat. Gustav nodded and followed after him towards the personal lab. They arrived within, and Serzil moved towards the right side and tapped on a few holographic buttons. SSHHCZZ, a rectangular-shaped board shifted out of the wall beside them, and a fresh corpse could be seen laying atop it. Are you sure you can do what you mentioned? Serzil asked Gustav. Well, I've had the ability for a while but never tried it. Back then, I could only modify a little, but now that my bloodline has increased a lot in rank, I should be able to do more, Gustav said while moving towards the board. Are there any more? Just in case I ruin this one, Gustav asked. Serzil nodded and tapped on the holographic keys again. SSSHHHSSZZZ SSHHSSZZ SSSHHSSZZ. 3 more boards pulled out of the wall reveal 1 female and 2 male corpses. They were preserved well enough, so they didn't look like they had been dead for long when it was, in fact, the opposite. Gustav had no idea how Serzel got these corpses, but he didn't care about that right now. He was more concerned about performing the experiment he had to for his plans to be complete. He would have done this earlier, but his original bloodline had just returned to full power a day before he was almost caught by the embryo. Gustav pictured a look in his mind and placed his right hand on the forehead of the first corpse. 3 reddish glowing veins appeared on his arm in the next instant, traveling from his shoulder area down to his wrist, and even appearing on his right palm. Flesh warping. Wasn't that the name the system gave it after I achieved the Falcon rank? Gustav thought as he concentrated on his original bloodline while trying to use this power. Graphically, the corpse's flesh in front of him started to wriggle, and some parts of the body began to bloat. "Oh, it's working!" Gustav muttered as he opened his eyes. The right leg became longer than the left leg, then reduced in size, becoming shorter than the left. "No, not. Humph. Bigger. Smaller. Rounder. Too flat. Longer." Gustav's voiced out as the corpse in front of him changed look repeatedly but wasn't becoming exactly as he wanted it to be. The look of the body was slowly started to turn familiar as it changed from the original short and fat-looking man. However, the belly had bloated a whole lot, and Gustav was trying to reduce it right now. "Medium-sized," he muttered, but then the belly completely decreased and even pushed inside like the owner of the body was malnourished. Other parts of the body were still wriggling as Gustav tried modifying them over and over again. Suddenly, bang! The body exploded into bits and pieces, scattering all over the place. Gustav pulled back a bit and managed to dodge the rain of body parts and liquid spills from the corpse. "I should have tried to learn how to use this earlier," Gustav thought out loud, but he also felt no situation warranted the need for this ability, and there was no one to try it on. He knew it would be dangerous to try it on a live human for the first time, not knowing what the consequences would be. He also could not just walk up to a mortuary and ask them to give him permission to experiment on the corpses kept there. That would be insane. This ability was attached to his genetic transformation bloodline, which of course was his original bloodline. Initially, according to the system's record, he could only change 1 or 2 body parts of a person to meet his desire. He could make a person's head bigger than its original size or slightly change the look of a person's face. Still, the ability was limited to just a little change. Gustav never saw the need for this ability, especially when it wasn't battle-related. His original bloodline wasn't the battle type, but shape-shifting had saved his life so many times, so he knew how useful it was. However, this particular ability related to morphing another person's look was the only one he never tried after unlocking it during his time in the embryo camp. Now the ability had become even more powerful than before after achieving the Falcon rank. According to the system, he could change an entire person's appearance using this ability. This meant he could make a person look like another person, just like he could shape-shift. Now the issue was he had no idea if it was something that could be controlled. Would it be temporary or permanent? What if he transformed a person's looks and was unable to make them go back to how they were? Or what if he messes up the person's look while trying to make them look different, and he is unable to change it back? There were just so many ways making use of this ability could go wrong. It was practically godlike, but at the same time with so many unknowns. Now a situation where he could repeatedly try it out had presented itself, and on the first try, he completely destroyed a full human body. Gustav couldn't help but think, what if it was a living and breathing person? Chapter 761. Now a situation where he could repeatedly try it out had presented itself. On the first try, he completely destroyed a full human body. Gustav couldn't help but think, what if it was a living and breathing person? Obviously, it would have ended in disaster, just like he feared all those times. No ability could be perfected on its first use, and this particular one would screw a person up if he had tried it on them. Gustav moved towards the next body by the side and breathed in and out a few times before placing his hand on the head of this corpse, just like the last one. He pictured an entire person's figure in his mind and activated the ability once more. Reddish veins popped up on his arms as power flowed from his palm into the face of this corpse. First, the face began changing structure, followed by the body parts. Similar to what had happened the last time, one arm would occasionally shorten, then increase in length once more. The skin tone of the corpse turned a light lighter as sounds of wriggling continued to ring out. This continued for over an hour, and Gustav still hadn't modified the body in the exact way he wanted it to be, but he was still a little glad, seeing that he had made progress compared to the last one. Gustav stared at the body structure he had modified so far and could say it looked half like the person he pictured in his mind, but if he was going to do this, he had to make sure it was completely accurate. Gustav now knew how this worked. His bloodstream was infiltrating the corpses when he activated this ability after placing his hand on their head. His genetic transformation bloodline, in particular, infiltrated their cells and gave him the power to externally modify their appearance. It was like giving them the power to shape-shift since his bloodline was within them, but then he was the one with the control. Based on how strong the cells of a person were, it could be less difficult or have an effect like the last one exploding. After another hour went by, Gustav could no longer modify the second corpse. It no longer responded to flesh warping after being modified for so long. Currently, the nose of the corpse was as long as a carrot, while some other body parts were weirdly out of shape too. "This is more difficult than I thought it would be." Gustav sighed and proceeded to move to the side to rest. Currently, his breathing was a little more hurried than before. This was because using this ability sapped a lot of bloodline energy from him. He had made his original bloodline the base for all his other bloodlines. His other bloodlines were connected to it, and so long as he channeled his original bloodline, others would also increase in rank. It took more toll on him when a lot of energy was being sapped from his original bloodline than others. This meant that, even after he had managed to master this ability, he couldn't use it on a whim. Gustav stared at the two other corpses available for him to use. He suspected he might even need more than what was available at the moment. He had been here for about 3 hours already, and it was getting close to daybreak since he arrived around midnight. The last phase of the plan will be stalled for longer than anticipated. I can do anything until I learn this, Gustav thought and resumed learning flesh warping. Within a massive apartment, a girl with blue hair and beautiful looks could be seen lying on a bed in one of the rooms. Her eyes suddenly sprang open as she sat up. "I can sense his presence," she muttered while standing to her feet. She quickly moved out of the room, arriving in front of a passageway. Doors could be seen along the passageways which led to other rooms. She arrived in front of the second one by the left and began knocking. Bang! 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 Her knock was so loud that in a few moments, the person within had already moved to open it up. "Vera, what is it?" Angie's voice resounded from the entrance of the room as the door opened up. "I can sense him. He's in the city right now," she voiced out with a tone of urgency. "Sense who?" Angie asked with a slightly confused look. "Gustav." The moment Vera stated this, Angie's eyes widened. "How?" she asked. "That's not important right now. We have to inform Miss Amy," Vera responded. It would seem she didn't directly go to Miss Amy herself since Miss Amy had stated that she only trusted a few of them. "Wake the others. They'll go inform Miss Amy right now," Angie instructed before dashing out of the passageways. Vera nodded and proceeded to go banging from door to door. Despite the fact that it was midnight, everyone seemed to be on the alert as it only took a few moments for them to respond. In a few moments, everyone was gathered in the living room except for one person. "Where's Miss Amy?" Eildris asked the moment Angie arrived back in their midst. "I've checked the entire building as well as the premises. She's nowhere to be found," Angie responded. A brief silence ensued amongst them as they stared at each other for some time. "She should be somewhere around the city. Maybe she has something to deal with," Falco said with a low tone. "Yeah. Is there any way to contact her?" Ildris asked Angie, who responded by shaking her head. Only Gustav would have known how to do that, and he's. Angie stopped speaking at that point since there was no point in saying the obvious. We'll have to make a decision ourselves then, Ildris said before turning to face Vera. Vera, are you sure you can sense him? Ildris inquired. I wouldn't wake everyone if I wasn't sure it's him, Vera said with a look of certainty. Chapter 762. So, can you direct us to where he is? Ildris asked next. His presence suddenly appeared in this city. I can't pinpoint his exact location. I only know he's somewhere in that direction, Vera said while pointing at the south. That doesn't leave us with a lot of clues, but it's something we can work with, Ildris said while staring at everyone. He didn't bother asking Vera how she was able to sense Gustav's presence even though everyone was kind of itching to know. The objective now was to cover the areas in the direction Vera pointed at. We'll have to split up and look for him ourselves, Ildris stated. We still have the mind comms that was given to us when we were leaving camp. We'll use that to communicate with each other. He voiced out as well. The others nodded in agreement. Matilda, Glade, Rhea, and Timmy, you four have the slowest speeds, so work together to cover the streets on the east area in this direction. Ildris began giving out instructions. Falco and you work together to cover the streets in the middle. Dark Falco is fairly fast, and ES Vortex should make movement even easier for you both. Vera and I will cover the east side in that direction, while Elevra will use her aerial abilities to scour the vicinities as well, Ildris added once more. Elevra and Vera nodded in understanding. It took almost unleashing the full extent of her abilities to fly, but Elevra knew the situation was dire, so she had no qualms having to be the aerial lookout. Angie is the fastest amongst every one of us, so she will move as a sole unit, covering the areas we miss. We have to make sure we don't cause too much disturbance while undergoing this operation, but make sure you report through the communications if you notice anything suspicious. Ildris concluded with this. Guys, be careful. If we end up causing too much disturbance, the MBO might be alerted. We don't want them knowing in on what we're up to. He voiced out next. Alright, let's move, Angie stated as everyone prepared to leave the apartment. They were still in their pajamas and would have worn their MBO outfits, but there was no time to do that right now. Vera said Gustav's presence just suddenly appeared in the city. There was a probability it would disappear soon, too, so they had to take hold of this opportunity to find him as soon as possible. Minutes later, forces blasted through the streets of Burning Sands City, cross-checking one building after the other. He would occasionally open multiple vortexes leading to spaces within a building. He would sometimes appear in people's rooms and slowly check around the place before getting out through another vortex that led to the next room. Dark Falco took over and jumped through the other vortexes he opened up as well. Sometimes he would crawl across window panes using the dark of the night to scan the entire building for Gustav. On Glade's side, their search was going according to the way Ildris planned it as well. They were the slowest amongst everyone, but their numbers made up for that. They would occasionally alert the people living around that area due to their speed, but when they brought out an MBO badge explaining they were in the middle of an investigation, the people around there would leave them be. Angie was so quick that she would be in and out of a building before anyone knew it. The only thing that would leave the people living in that area suspicious was the sudden intensity of the wind. They would wonder when they left the windows open. Ildris' speed was similar to Gustav's without making use of dash. He would be able to scan an entire apartment using the colors of every object in the surroundings. This made it easier for him to do this while carrying Vera along. Vera wasn't fast, but she was useful for telling if they were getting closer to Gustav or not. Vera could put her consciousness into things, and luckily for her, she had been training it in the way Gustav told her to. Catch that bird for me, she said to Ildris as they arrived in the middle of a street. Ildris had no idea why she would need that, but he leaped from side to side across the skyscrapers in the vicinity, and caught the bird in a few seconds. Bang! The moment he landed on the ground, He handed it over to Vera unscathed. It looked a little like an eagle with leopard-colored feathers and 12 inches long feathery tail. Vera closed her eyes while holding on to the bird, and in a few moments she let it go. Eldris was wondering what that was all about, and in the next moment, the bird flew in through one of the windows of a building by the side. I can see through its eyes and control its actions, she explained to Eldris, whose face lit up in astonishment after hearing that. He thought her power was related to controlling plants since this was what she made use of during battles within the Embark camp. Now it turned out it was more than just that. Eldris grabbed hold of Vera and once again began dashing across the place with speed. Vera covered her left eye to focus on the right, where she could see the bird moving within buildings. Her eyes caught hold of multiple weird acts going on in some rooms, but she didn't react to it since she was more focused on finding Gustav. Already checked this one. Let's move to the next, she voiced out as Eldris was about to go inside a building. He nodded and proceeded to move towards the next. Up above, Elevra flew across the city with her forehead revealed. The large purplish eye on her forehead pulsating with unknown energy scanned across the buildings as she flew from place to place. The visual from the eye on her forehead saw through the buildings, making it easy for her to cover the area she was assigned. Chapter 763. The visual from the eye on her forehead saw through the buildings, making it easy for her to cover the area she was assigned. Everyone had a map of the city that displayed the streets that extended in the direction Vera had pointed them in. The moment any street in the Area A group was assigned had been cleared, they would communicate through the mine's comms to make sure Angie didn't have to check those places again. Angie was lowering the intensity of her speed on purpose so as not to cause too much commotion across the city. If this wasn't the case, it would only take her a minute to check every single space within a 200-story building. This search went on for over 2 hours, and it was almost 6 in the morning. If daybreak arrived, they would have to suspend their search. After making them settle in the apartment, Miss Amy had told them they had to be careful with their movements. Although she made the MBOs stop with their search for Gustav in the meantime, beneath the surface, they would still covertly keep their eyes on all of them. Which meant the moment they found out they were onto Gustav, the MBO might try something sneaky. They would be followed if they weren't careful, so the moment daybreak arrived, they would suspend their search. Can you still sense his presence? Eldris asked Vera as they arrived at a rooftop. Yes, we're getting closer, Vera said as they leaped towards the next rooftop. Any suspicious sightings up there, Elevra? Eldris asked through the mind comms. Nothing at all. Everything seems normal, Elevra responded. I'm closing in on a dead end. The other parts of the city in this direction extend towards the line you and Vera are covering, Elevra stated. After covering the places in that area, come join us, Eldris stated. H&M. I just spotted a link to an underground passageway within a building. I can skin through it, so I'll have to go down there and check it out personally, Elevra said while swooping down from the sky as purplish energy covered her entire frame. Copy, just make sure you report back if you find anything. Eldris. They continued on with the search, knowing they had only a few more minutes left before stopping. 30 minutes later, they were back in the apartment with looks of contemplation as they stared at Eldris. We will cover the rest later at night. Since it's already daybreak, we can't risk being followed, Eldris stated. Everyone nodded in agreement. Besides, we are halfway done, so I'm sure we will be able to cover the rest this night, Eldris added. But what if we don't find him? Glade voiced out with a look of worry. Vera said. Before Angie could complete her sentence, Glade interrupted. Yeah, Vera said. And we all trusted her without even questioning how she is able to sense Gustav's presence in the first place? What if it's a hoax? What if she's wrong, and we're just wasting our time searching in the wrong place? Glade questioned repeatedly. Well, Angie was unable to answer these questions, and some of them turned to stare at Vera. I just want us to find my rival. It doesn't matter if she's sure or not, Ria voiced out next. At least it's better than just staying here without doing nothing. Timmy added as well. Come to think of it, we were all brought here so we could help them predict Gustav's mode of thinking so they can find out his next move or at least track him with the knowledge we provide of him. But none of us can actually predict his mode of thinking because Gustav does things in unpredictable ways, Falco said with a tone of admiration. Even if we were to provide them with any information, it wouldn't do them any good because no one can ever tell what Gustav is up to unless he reveals it himself. Haha, the MBO has no idea who they're dealing with. He chuckled lightly as he voiced out. He's probably planning a way to get himself out of this mess right now, but I'm sure the MBO thinks he's just running away aimlessly. Ildris analyzed with a contemplative look. That's not the point. How do we know we're looking for him in the right place? Glade voiced out once more. Let Vera tell us how she is able to sense him, so we know we're not following her blindly. Glade added. Are you saying you don't trust her? Angie asked. Has she given us any reason to? Glade questioned back. I think the better question is, has she given us any reason not to? He voiced out next. I know she was really tight with Gustav Kost. They spent a lot of time together. I'm trusting on that. He added while shrugging his shoulders. This also happened to be Ildris, Angie, Falco, and the others' reason as well, so they nodded in agreement. I don't have any reason not to help. I would die for him if I had to, Vera said with a passionate gaze in her eyes. The entire place turned silent for a while as everyone sneakily stared at Angie, wanting to see her expression. Angie tried to maintain her composure, but there was no denying that Vera's last statement made her feel a little unhinged. Anyways, let's just make sure to check the rest of the area by night. Angie cleared her throat before speaking. I think we should have someone or a few of us covertly check around during the day too. Who's to say Gustav will be in this city till night? Elevra finally spoke. She had analyzed from everything they had said that Gustav was unpredictable. If he suddenly appeared in the city, what's to stop him from suddenly disappearing too? Maybe we. What are you kids doing? A feminine voice was heard from the entrance of the living room. Miss Amy. Everyone was surprised as they saw her arrive in front of them in nearly an instant. They didn't even know when she arrived. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.